Hello, welcome to Conversion Dialogues. This is Xavier Bonilla. On this episode, I'm talking with Hannah Bradshaw. Hannah is an assistant professor of psychology at Washington and Jefferson College. She has her PhD in experimental psychology, and she is someone that is researching and studying aspects of social psychology, marketing, health psychology, interpersonal and ecological cues about how they affect our perceptions and decisions within the social world. She also studies consumer preferences and behavior, along with disgust sensitivity. I've followed some of her research for quite some time and was really excited to talk to her and to talk to her in a very long format, which I think both enjoyed a lot, and we talked about a whole host of things. We start the conversation by talking about, her background and some of her research and how she came to research the things that she currently does. We start the conversation kind of slightly tangential and talk about, signaling of sorts and people that have dogs and what that signals. We talk about the dynamics of male friendships. We talk about the dynamics of female friendships. And then we talk about opposite sex friendships. We talk about the different levels of friendship, boundaries in opposite sex friendships, intrasexual female competition, men and women in the workforce together, potential careers for younger generations, and we end the conversation talking about disgust and some of the sex differences therein. This was such a fun conversation, mostly because it really is that. It's just a conversation. Obviously, we had some, an outline. I had prepared many things, but, in many ways, we kind of start a topic much like, whatever she was, studying or what her research has been focused on, and then we would just kind of riff off of that. And I think it was really, really rewarding, at least for me. It was such a great conversation because it's conversational, but also because we really kind of wrestle with some of these topics, and there's no clear answers, and there's some data to support some things, and there's still other things that are more ambiguous. And so it was really fun to, try and kind of think out loud about what could some of these things mean, and what are some directions that could go in the future. And so, she's just obviously brilliant, and she's so much fun to talk to and get all of her ideas. And I can't say how happy I am to share the conversation with everyone. And so now I bring you Hannah Bradshaw. I'm here with Hannah Bradshaw. Hannah, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while, so I'm excited to talk with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I think it's going to be fun.
Yes, I have this thing unofficially, I think, where I will obviously talk to people that have books that come out or other things that are being released, and that's fun. But then I also like to talk to people that don't have a book coming out or don't have something that they're doing, and they do really, really good research, and they're in the lab and they're doing things. I also like talking to different folks that talk about history or other things. So it's always a nice mix. I talk to clinicians as well, and so that's always, kind of home base in some ways. So it's always fun, though, talking to people that are doing really good research like yourself. So I'm excited for that.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you to say.
Yeah. Okay, so tell people who you are. People that don't know who you are, tell them a little bit about your background. What your not necessarily what your degrees are in, but that's what your research areas are in, how you got into that, and what you're looking at now.
Oh, wow. So you're gonna have to cut me off because I tend to ramble.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
So who I am, and then what I do, basically. How I got into this?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, and what you're currently researching.
Okay, cool. So I have like a weird educational history. So I was homeschooled throughout my entire...
Really?
Yeah.
I was as well. I actually was as well. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay, so that makes sense. And then people think us homeschoolers are like weird. But, I mean, we are weird, but it's fine.
We are weird, but that's funny though. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. It does.
Everything clicks for you now.
Yeah, because my dad always says that like homeschoolers don't so much care about like fitting into social boxes, and they kind of just do their own thing.
It's kind of true, yeah.
Yeah, so I like that.
And usually, I wouldn't say everybody, but usually pretty self-directed and, really like to explore things and try and figure new things out. Typically, my experience with other people that have been homeschooled. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would agree. So I was homeschooled, and then I started going to like a community college when I was like 16.
Mm-hmm.
And I went there, and it was great. It was much. I don't know if my teachers are still there, but it was kind of easier for me than like, teaching yourself stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because my education was pretty self-directed from the time that I was like 12 up.
Mm-hmm.
So I liked community college, and I transferred to a big state school. It's not that big, but compared to the community college, Western Illinois University.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to be a lawyer because I watched a lot of Law and Order, and I really
Mm-hmm.
wanted to prosecute sexual offenders,
Mm-hmm.
But then I was talking to some lawyers, and they were like, oh, well, the likelihood of, they get away, and
Yeah.
it's actually hard to do that.
Mm.
And then I was like, oh, God, I don't think I could live with myself if that happens. And I would probably have to, go out and murder them. And then my thing that I say is I'm too pretty to go to jail. So I was like, okay, I can't do that. So I didn't know what I was going to do. And I kind of fell into it in a weird way. I was taking a social psych course with Dr. Kelly at WIU, Western Illinois University. And she called me into her office, and she was like, have you thought about doing research? I didn't know that I could do research. I didn't know it was like a thing that I could do. So I was surprised, and I was like, sure, I could do this. So I did my master's there, and then I applied to PhD programs, and I got into my top choice at TCU with Dr. Sarah Hill.
Mm-hmm.
And I started doing research on women's competition. And then I kind of also fell into the disgust stuff just because it's interesting.
Yeah.
I enjoy disgust.
Yes, it's very interesting.
Yeah. And then I applied to, I went on the job market right before the pandemic hit. And I got an offer from Washington and Jefferson College, W&J. And so I am now here. Here is where I am, in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it's always interesting how people, anytime I talk to them, they'll say, well, I didn't get started out this way. And it's always an interesting backstory. And then, it's very rare that someone's like, I wanted to be this, and it just went exactly how I planned it in a very linear fashion. And here I am. That very rarely happens. So it's always interesting to hear where people's, stories start and where they're at. And I guess, what are you currently researching? So I know you said a little bit of disgust. I know of Sarah Hill and her research, but what are you currently doing yourself?
So right now I'm attempting to, what am I doing right now? That's a good question. I'm doing some stuff with,
or more recently, I should say, the last couple of papers or something you put out.
Yeah. So I'm interested in like women who prefer to be friends with men over other women. And I'm interested in like what outrage signals on social media, because I find that sort of stuff real cringy.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I think it's a strategy by like a particular kind of person.
Mm.
So I'm looking into that. I'm looking into some stuff about dogs and what owning a certain kind of dog says about you as a person. I'm also interested.
What if you don't own dogs?
I don't know.
Does that say something else?
I think it does. There's some work on that is pretty fascinating.
They don't like all the responsibility.
Yeah. I think it's a symbol. If you own a dog, I guess it's a signal rather of like investment, especially for women. It's like, hey, this dude can take care of kids.
But isn't that what it's kind of become though?
Yeah.
Right.
It's also kind of,
or in how it would be in like maybe more urban or cities, as opposed to people that own dogs in like a rural setting.
True, because people use dogs for different stuff in more rural settings. You have like your hunting dogs, or they keep them outside, which I have a strong reaction to, but I probably shouldn't, because I don't know. But where I grew up, people just kept their dogs outside, like chained in the front yard. They'd just be there, with that patch of dirt that they've worn down. Sub-zero weather, dogs outside. But no, I think it would depend on the context, definitely. But especially in more urban areas or more developed countries, it's become I don't know. I think Shelley Volsch, I'm not sure if I'm saying her name right. She has some more work suggesting that my age group, particularly now, substitutes dogs for like kids.
It certainly seems that way.
Yeah, it's like dog mom, you know.
Yeah. It's an interesting. I didn't know there was research on it, so it's interesting. Yeah, there's something that is. Yeah, it's at least it's definitely observable, but I guess it's hard, at least for me, to kind of quantify like what it is. But people definitely see it. I don't know if they see it intentionally as like a sort of signaling, although I think it has become that maybe in some aspects. But like, well, I have this kind of dog, and let me make sure I tell you this dog's a rescue as opposed to being like, full breed or whatever. It all becomes like a signal, and it's like, okay, so you're trying to tell me you're a good person, or I don't know. It's a very interesting thing, and I don't know if people intentionally do it, but it is an interesting phenomenon, I think, especially in more urban areas.
Yeah, but they do that. They're like, oh, this is Freddie, he's a rescue. And I'm like, that's great. I just wanted to pet him. I don't need to know his background. But
no, that's happened to me. I've lived around DC and Baltimore, but every time I go into the city, and DC is it's a pretty dog friendly place. Various dog parks and all these things. And, there's certain places that will be very hospitable to dogs, which is totally fine. But one time, so I'm not one of those people that like sees a dog and is like, oh my goodness, losing my mind. I'm going to cross the street through traffic to pet a dog, because I'm just not one of those people. But, I know other people that are. But I was waiting for something, and this lady had a dog, and I was just kind of sitting there. I don't know if I was at a Starbucks or something, and the dog was just kind of next to me. And so I said, oh, can I pet your dog? Because it was kind of next to me. She's like, yeah, of course. And then I said, and before I could even say like, what's the dog's name or, whatever, it was just like, this is so-and-so. He's a rescue. He has this congenital issue. I was just like, man, I don't want the dog's face sheet. I just wanted to know like what the dog's name was, and how do you like having the dog, and how long you had him, and like I don't know. It's just tell me what he likes. It was so weird to like hear like all of these like, yes, he has 3 legs because he had an accident. It's just like, I don't know. It's just a weird kind of thing for me. I don't know. But why?
No, it is weird.
What do you make of that, and why are you interested in looking at it?
Because people do that. So I notice that they do it, and I want to know why. Because that's just how I live my life, probably because I was homeschooled, because I don't understand social norms. And I'm like, why do you do that? Like, why are you telling me that your dog's a rescue? Like, that's great. But like, I mean, I have 2 standard poodles. Mm-hmm. We call them substandard because they're small. Mm-hmm. So my partner came up with that. But I don't know. I don't like, whenever people, come up and they want to pet him, I'm not like, oh, he's a standard poodle. Mm-hmm. This is a thing. Mm-hmm. I'm just like, yeah, this is Mephisto. He's really nice. He'll try to snuggle you. But whenever there's a rescue dog, people always have to tell me. Yeah. And I don't know why it is. I think I don't know if they're conscious of doing it, but it's definitely a thing that they do. And I think it says something about you as a person.
Yeah, I mean, intuitively, that would be I would agree. But I'll be curious to see what you find out. So,
yeah, I'm working with a student on it. So we'll see where it goes. So,
yeah. Okay, so let's talk about some more of your more recent stuff. We can kind of get at this at any point here, but I guess we can talk about generally relationships with men and women. I talked to Tanya Reynolds not that long ago, and so we talked a lot about intrasexual female competition. So folks can get the full download. I think Tanya and I did 4 hours, and it was a lovely conversation. Yeah, it was really great. So I'll be interested to see what your perspectives are on some of that, especially as it becomes relevant to other topics that you've looked at as well. But yeah, so I have talked about some of this. We did mention something in there which has become, again, just interesting for me. I don't do research, so I haven't looked at it officially, but I I talked about it with her, and I talked about it, I think, with a little bit with Jamie Krems as well. We talked about this idea of attractiveness privilege, which is a really interesting concept. So maybe we can talk about that. So, but first, let's talk about these dynamics with men and women. So, you mentioned in the beginning here that you look at women that have what's the way I should say this? Women that are friends with guys, they have a platonic, non-sexual relationship. How do we say this?
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
I'm messing with you. I call them guys, girls. I think now the Gen Zs, whenever I describe this in class, they say, "Oh, the pick-me girl."
Yeah.
But
yes, I'm familiar with this.
Yeah, but I don't really think the pick-me term is specific enough, but I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe I just haven't. Maybe I'm just not a Gen Z. I don't.
Well, I mean, I'll have to ask my 15-year-old. She keeps me up to pace on everything now. Okay, so tell us about this. So maybe just kind of, I think your background is in the evolutionary model of things, right? So maybe just kind of tell us in general terms first. We can start there of what is it about relationships between men and women in general of why we, for cooperation or interdependence or things like that. You can talk about obviously mating, and that's a huge thing. But then where do we find aspects of friendship in general? And then how does that go with opposite sex friendships?
Okay, well, that's broad enough to hang myself. I like that. So humans are social creatures, and because of that, we're group living creatures. So we have a host of social relationships. If you think about how humans historically lived and then how we currently live now, it's somewhat different. We used to be much more kin-based, if you will. And now we don't, which has its, well, at least I don't know. In the modern westernized world, we don't, which has a bunch of problems. But I digress. So social relationships are really important for well-being. And when you look at these social relationships, there's of course the kin relationships, which are their own different thing, because if you share genes with someone, your fitness is tied to theirs. So it's somewhat different than interactions with non-genetic relatives. So I mostly focus on interactions with non-genetic relatives. So, how are we forming maybe romantic relationships, or what drives attraction? I do this with heterosexual individuals. So what drives attraction under what contexts? And then what I'm particularly interested in right now, same-sex social dynamics. So what in certain contexts leads you to prefer being friends with, especially if you are a woman, what leads you to want to be a friend with another woman? Because that sort of, it's called homosociality. It's much more common than is having opposite sex friends, which is, I don't know, it's interesting. And you also kind of see lifespan differences in this, like when these relationships form and when they end. And yeah, I mostly focus on like the women's side of things. I become much more interested in the men's side of things because y'all's friendships are just weird to me. Like growing up with the four sisters, it's like, do you make fun of your guy friends? Like I'm teaching this FYS class and it's a first year seminar. And so I guess the guys in the class, like they describe their friendships with other guys as like, yeah, no, we just like make fun of each other all the time. Do you do that?
It's yes. The short answer is yes. I think it varies. There's something about male. I don't know. I don't think about it this way, but if I pause and think about it, there's always this undercurrent of like aggression with male friendships. So not aggressive in the sense of like, I'm going to kick your ass, although that's always a threat there too. But it's more of, you know what? I'm going to I'm going to rib you on this issue, or I'm going to tease you on this issue, or I'm going to make fun of you on this issue, or various issues. And we're all going to laugh at your expense. And if you can't take it, then you're X, Y, and Z. you're not a man enough, or you're being sensitive, or whatever. There's other ways to describe that. And so it's like, okay, there's always this kind of like playfulness. So I'm thinking of, obviously, plenty of clients that I see that will tell me this in their interactions with others. But then I'll think about it in terms of like with my own male friends that I have. If we talk through any medium, phone, text, in person, in various contexts, in various environments, there's always this kind of like playful humor. If I talk to, men in my family, same kind of thing. So I would say yes. My experience is always that. And I do think it becomes difficult. I can think of a few people in my family that they don't do that as much, or they do it in different ways. And so then they kind of like, they don't fit in. Like you have to, there's always like a kind of edge, and like there's a variance to this stuff, right? So it's like, some people might have different senses of humor. They might have different ways of, teasing other people. But it's always, I don't know. It's like a like not taking yourself too serious kind of thing. Like if you don't like the joke or something, it's just like, oh, come on, dude. Like, we're just fucking around. Like, why are you getting like all ridiculous about it? Like that's what would come up. And then if there's other people involved, you'd be like, come on, man. Like, why are you being like ridiculous about this? Whatever. I mean, obviously there's limits to this. It depends on what it is. Like, there are certain like norms or rules, like, but yes, I think overall, and I'm thinking of like this in different contexts. So like, even like professionally, like even like with colleagues I have now, I do, psychology, and I've been a clinician. So, but I never interact with men. Right?
Yeah.
So over
such a female dominated field.
Over 80% is women, which is fine. Doesn't bother me necessarily. I'm just saying, like, it's the few times I'll see another, male psychiatrist, psychologist, and therapist, clinician. It's just like, oh, another one of you. And so we'll something to kind of chat about. But even in serious conversations I've had, where, we're talking about, philosophy, or I don't know, something really serious, or some social issue. There's always like a place where that can come into play. So I would say, just in my anecdotal experience, yes, that is the case.
And I think that is in general like a more like a norm that we see in men's friendships. I don't know. I've been wondering why that is, because I don't think that sort of thing happens as much in, female same-sex friendships. Not to that extent.
So let me ask it this way. So are you saying, well, I'm not trying to pin you down, but
no, it's definitively. Fine. Pin me down. It's good.
But I'm just saying, like, are you saying that like women don't play around? Like they don't make jokes with each other? You're not saying
not
that.
To that extent. Like we joke around, or at least in my experiences, just like not to that extent. Like I've seen the way that dudes interact with each other, as like an observer. And I'm like, if one of my friends who's a woman like said that to me, like I would never speak to her again. Like in public, in front of other people, I would never speak to her again. Mm-hmm. We would be dead. Like cut off. You're done.
Right. Yeah. I've heard this.
I don't know. I think it's a thing that, this is my hypothesis, my reasoning why I'm asking about this. I think it's like a shit testing mechanism, like for male social relationships, where it's like, can you deal with this? It's like poking at you to see what you do under pressure. Like, can you keep your cool? Are you a good affiliation partner? But
I definitely think there's a type of sizing up of like, what can you handle? Right. And it's not meant to be like a test per se, but it is sort of. And like, if you were to ask somebody that, they wouldn't say that. They wouldn't say, "Oh, I'm just testing you to see how much you can take." It's more of like but I mean, I don't know. I think implicitly it is there. I don't know. It is a very strange thing, but it is. I also find it interesting in the other way, where women don't interact that way, or I mean, I don't want to say universally, but I would imagine that if there was a woman that had other female friends that acted that way with her female friends, like you're saying, like she would not be in the group. They wouldn't hang out with her.
No, not as much. I mean, I'm sure there might be norms where there are groups of women who do that. But in my experience, that sort of teasing isn't as prevalent.
Yeah. But why?
I don't know. And that's why I find it fascinating. I don't know. I think it's like a group bonding sort of thing that guys tend to do, but women don't tend to do it. I think it might have to do something with like how, like groups of men interacting together historically would have been much like better for like warfare and whatnot. You have those sorts of dynamics, whereas you don't really have. It's much rarer when you have like coordinated, overt aggression with groups of women. Like you don't really see that.
Well, I remember the conversation with Jamie, and I think just in general, the literature still consistent on this is that you correct me here. So typically, women have more intimate relationships, meaning more self-disclosure. It's more relational. They'll talk about, their deepest thoughts and feelings about, whatever. It's more of an intimacy type of thing in that way of feelings and thoughts and experiences and other relationships, etc. But the again, on average, women don't usually hold relationships that long. Right. So they're not going to have 30-year friendships.
I mean, they
do, but it's less rare.
But it's much rarer because those sorts of relationships, you have that like close interpersonal connection where you're sharing everything and you're like, oh, and like they share literally everything. Like if you're, I don't know, if you have like a wife who has friends, like she tells her friends everything, like everything. It's just a thing that happens. So I don't know. But then if you like move out of the area and you can no longer stay in contact, I mean, now we have social media and whatnot. But yeah, women's friendships on average tend to not last as long as do men's. They're much more sensitive to like slights in the friendship. Friendships are more likely to dissolve and whatnot.
Yeah. When I've asked my wife this, she definitely has a small group of people that she's maintained over the years, and other friendships I think are just seasonal, and you work with them or you went to school with them or something, and you might kind of stay connected right on social media or something loosely, but in terms of like talking and all that, I mean, so that's what I've gathered.
And I mean, my experiences would also be consistent with the literature, whereas if there's like a schism in the friendship, like someone breaks a social norm, then it's like the relationship is just like done. It's like we're never talking again. Like I won't even make eye contact if I see you in the hall. It's just, it is unfortunate, but it happens to be what it is.
I do wonder. So I will say this on this point. I do wonder. So we're saying this about guys, right? And I do agree with that. But if I think about the things that really like will kind of offset a guy. So I should clarify. I think again, generally, men have many more friendships and relationships, but it's less intimate, so they can maintain it for a long time. I don't think that's the only reason why it's maintained for a long time, but they can just kind of like, it's very interest based. If we both like the same sport or we both like, the same hobby or interest, we can just kind of, keep it on that lane. And so it doesn't really have any spillover to other stuff. So it's less, I guess you could say it's not as high stakes, right? Well, I'm not talking about, how I felt in this conversation with somebody and I cried my eyes out and it was so hard and it's like all that stuff. That just doesn't really happen for men. Should it or should it not, especially nowadays in a modern society? I think it's a really important question to ask. But yeah, and I can come back to male friendships in a minute. But I was going to say that I do think where you see something for men is there is a sense of like loyalty. Like dudes really, I think in general, but definitely with other dudes. Like if a guy feels somebody is disloyal, that's like, that might be the thing that's like you're gonna go to the chopping block. That's not, there's no return from that. And I think we see that, right? We see that in society. We see that in various relationships. And so, disloyalty could be obviously very obvious things like infidelity or something. Okay, that's the big obvious one. But it could be in other ways too, though, I think. It could be in certain dynamics like with other people, or I don't know. I think it shows up in different ways. I mean, there's the obvious ones, but I think it does show up. And I wonder if for guys, there's a disloyal thing. But all these things to say, it just seems that men and women are operating on two different evolutionary codes in terms of social dynamics. Is this how you would see it as well?
Yeah, that is how I see it. And I think that that's somewhat consistent with the literature as well. So how you described the friendship dynamics is pretty accurate. Male friendships, they tend to have more of them. Their social networks are larger in general. Less deep friendships, more activity-based. With female same-sex friendships, what we tend to see, you get these dyads, so it's a lot of information sharing. You share stuff about yourself. These friendships take a lot of work. They take a lot of time. And then they're prone to dissolving when something might go wrong in the friendship. So if you hear that your friend is doing like saying stuff about you, like because you've shared all this information with this person, so now if they are sharing that information or if they show that they are a threat, it's just cutting them off. It's like, why would I share any more information with you? You are not trustworthy. It tends to be what happens, but it's really unfortunate. I think when these relationships end, it feels almost like a breakup.
Yeah, it's like a loss. It's a loss. It's definitely a loss. Yeah, because there's a lot of emotional and interpersonal investment.
Indeed. Yes.
So I guess we can come back to that, but I'm feeling this pull now on the opposite sex relationships. Okay, so I'm going to ask you another close-ended question. Do you think men and women that are both, heterosexual, straight, can they have platonic relationships, friendships? Like purely.
On average, or?
Sure, we'll go with that.
Like my opinion, I think it is hard.
Sure.
I think it's hard to have those. I think they can exist. I think on average, though, it is very difficult to have those.
Yeah. So I'm curious, why the hesitancy and why do you think it's difficult? I agree with you. Yeah, I mean, but you're closer to this, obviously, on the literature. So why is this difficult?
I think it's difficult because there's always the potential for there to be something more. So if you look at what men and women value in their opposite sex friends, the things that they value in their opposite sex friends are things that they value in their mates too. So like men tend to
Is that how it works?
Yeah, I believe so. I think who's the researcher who's done this? Was in the Bus Lab, April Bleske. Check. If you haven't talked to her, she's fantastic. Like, I'm in love with her.
I'm familiar with who she is. Yeah.
Yeah. So the stuff that we value in our opposite sex friends tends to be stuff that we value in our mates as well. And I don't know. I think if you look at the research on are you kind of secretly sexually interested in your opposite sex friends? Like, there's usually like a little bit of that there. Like, I think on the surface level, it can be platonic, but I think, I don't know, under the right situation, it could quickly not become platonic. Just because we're choosing these people who could potentially be mates.
Okay, so let me ask this. Let me ask it this way. So this is a little bit of a weird place my brain is going, but I'm trying to just, flush this out. So we don't have that. Maybe some people do. We don't have that for family members.
Well, no, because that's like incest, and there's a whole reason why we don't have that.
Right. Yes. And the anthropology of that is very interesting. But I'm just saying, like, it's not just the fact that it's somebody of the opposite sex, right? So it's not just, so like if I have a sibling or a cousin or an aunt or an uncle or what, in my case, an aunt or a cousin or sister, like, I know in my brain, like, that's completely off limits, even though they're an opposite sex person. So is there something different about a friend? So someone that's not related to me and they're the opposite sex. We don't have that same switch where it's like, well, this person isn't available. Like they can't, I would never do this. I could never, much in the same way as like, again, an aunt, a cousin, a sister, or whatever. We don't have that kind of, maybe not the same switch, but like a, analogous switch for somebody that's a opposite sex friend. That doesn't exist. I
don't want to make universals. I think in general it's less likely to be there. Okay. This is what the research would say. Like, people tend to report feeling some sort of like a little bit of sexual interest for their friends. I don't know. I'm sure that there are completely platonic relationships out there, but it's also maybe one side of the friendship can be platonic, but the other side is not. And it's like, we are just friends. And it's like, no, I'm secretly in love with you.
Sure. I'm sure that happens. I'm sure that happens. But I just want to, so going back to the thing that you were mentioning, I'm trying to think of why that may be. I guess it's because like people aren't these like discrete categories. Yeah. So like people are super complex. They're super multivariate. And like, I don't know. I think there's a lot more complexity here. So like, so it could be unilateral. So it could be like you're saying one way. It's not necessarily bilateral, although it could be that too. But then I guess that's interesting. So I guess it does go then to what people see, or how this goes back to our earlier conversation. What are people seeing in friendships, right? What do they want? What are they getting out of it? And if women are looking at other friendships with other women in a different way, right? It's a kind of a different evolutionary code, and men have a different evolutionary code. Well, then you swap it, right? Or you cross it, I guess you could say. So like, look, people are coming from two different codes of sorts, and now they're interacting, but they're not acting in a non-sexual way or a platonic or just, friendship way. What, I guess, are they getting out of it, right? So if men go to other men for, kind of interest, hobbies, etc., certain things, whatever, and women go to other women for, again, this kind of dyad, a lot of, self-disclosure, a lot of sharing, a lot of, close intimacy. Do they, again, on average, do you think that women just have friendships with men and want the same kind of things they get with female friends, and vice versa? Do men go and have friendships with women and just try and get the same kinds of things they get with their male friends? Or does it swap? Or is it change somehow? And it's like, well, all of a sudden, men that have female friends, now they're more self-disclosing and they're talking more about these other things, and maybe vice versa. Females that hang out with men, they're going to watch the football game and talk about whatever interest or whatever. Is it what happens there when there's that cross?
I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, when we look at male and female friendships, men tend to disclose more to their female friends. I think when women do have opposite sex friendships, they tend to be women who tend to spend more time in male typical activities. So it could very well be more activity based. These friendships are pretty, I mean, they're functional, right? Because if you even look in like non-human primates having, because you have sexual dimorphism in humans, right?
Right.
So, and just to like use an animal example, so if you have a non-human primate, and if you are a female primate, having a male friend provides you with a lot of protection ability, just because they're on average larger, they're stronger, etc. Not being sexist, just describing a pattern of data that exists in the world. But that provides you with protection ability. And I think it also functions in our normal society that way. So do you know Jeff Gasson? Or have you heard of Jeff Gasson? So he was in our lab. So we had like a lab full of women, and then there's Jeff. And so like,
I'm familiar with this experience, all in grad school.
Yes. So, lab full of women. And if we're going out somewhere, it's like if we have Jeff with us, it's like nobody's gonna mess with us, and like nobody would mess with us anyway because we were all like badasses. But it's just, it provides you with a sort of,
he's the muscle,
protection ability.
He's the muscle.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm also more like aggressive than Jeff is, which is funny. But yeah, it's like they're good for carrying heavy stuff. They're functional. I don't mean to say that that's all that you're good for, but it's like women don't tend to do a lot of, at least that, good for something. Women tend to do don't tend to do as much emotion sharing in their cross-sex friendships, from what I remember of the literature.
So I guess the question here then becomes, I don't want to put a valence on it or anything, but I would say that there has to be okay. So if you look at, I'm going to steer clear of any of the current culture wars kinds of issues on this. What I mean is that if you look at men as a continuum, meaning there's different types of dudes out there, right? So not all dudes like, sports and working out excessively and I don't know, whatever the stereotypes are. I don't even know what they are anymore, but whatever the stereotypical dude is, right? And the same thing for women. There's the, whatever the stereotype for women is, there's a range here, right? There's women that don't like doing those things. And there's men that don't like doing certain things. Maybe some dudes are really into reading and art and I don't know, other things that wouldn't be like, they don't like sports and they don't like, muscle cars and working out. I don't know, whatever, right? There's a variance here, right? We can understand that. In that way, would that be seeming to say that like it would be potentially beneficial then for like, let's say, the woman that is, maybe historically was called a tomboy or whatever, right? Liked more interest in certain things or really likes hockey or something or whatever. Well, it would make sense that, she would hang out with the guys, right? Because she, probably her group of, friends that are women aren't going to get together on Sunday and talk about their fantasy league and, crush a couple beers and watch, whomever win or lose, right? So what are you going to do? You're going to go and hang out with dudes like that. And like, maybe she's not sharing, right? Like some really hard thing at work that happened and how she was this and this, and just spends, 45 minutes talking about it and sharing. She has her group of girls to do that with, or women to do that with, and vice versa, right? Maybe if men feel like, I just got to get this off my chest, and oh my gosh, and I can't talk with this guy who's telling me about, this exhaust he's going to fix on his car and his 19 whatever. Like, he's just going to be like, I don't know, dude, whatever, get over it, So I'm going to talk to my female friend and she'll help me out. Like, do you feel like there's again, I'm not trying to put a valence, but that there is a utility for this kind of crossing of like women that don't maybe fit in the stereotype could be really good to have male friends and vice versa, or how do you see it?
No, I think you're spot on there. So if you don't fit into the stereotypical gender norm of your sex or your gender, you would tend to be drawn towards the opposite sex. So I think there's even work on this in like adolescence. If you're not accepted by your same-sex peers, you tend to be drawn to like the cross-sex. So this is true for both men and women, or girls and boys, rather. So if you're not accepted by your same sex, you tend to go and form friendships with other people. And I mean, friendships are useful. They do serve functions.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Especially for humans.
Yes, indeed. Right. And I don't think that there's a valence on it. I think it's good to have friends in general.
So there are different kinds of friends though. Yeah. Like there's different levels, if you will, or again, I'm not trying to necessarily place a hierarchy. Like these are my best friends. These are my best friends. Right. And these are all my acquaintances. I'm not trying to make it in that way, but sometimes when I'll work with people clinically on this, right? People really want connection, and many people, men included, want a little bit deeper connection, and it's very hard to kind of foster that, and definitely hard to maintain it. People do seek that. I hear that a lot. I hear that in my personal life too. People really do want good friends. People always, I don't want to say always, but many of the times people want the friendships to be pretty reciprocal. Many people will cite, that I talk to, say, I feel like I'm doing all the work here. I'm always calling, I'm always texting, I'm always saying, let's hang out. I'm always planning it. And this person just doesn't do it. But I guess my question on that is that I feel like, I could be wrong on this. I feel like people, they have like a one size fits all in friendships. Like everybody's got to be this. Like if you're my friend, you're my friend. And I've told people, I'm like, listen, some friends are just going to be those people you see at the show every couple months, and you're just, hey, I'll see you at the next one. Right. Some people, it's just going to be the people at the bar, on, Saturday night, the hangout crew, the ones that like to still go and do the raves and go to clubs and stuff. And like that's fine. Like, and when you're out with them, you can have a blast. It's going to be a fantastic time. And then, then you're going to have the other friends where you're going to meet up for coffee every 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, whatever it is. And you're going to catch up. And then you're going to have your ride or die, the ones that know where all the bodies are buried. Right. And,
Indeed.
That's important too. And so I just feel like sometimes people feel like they just put like one lens on it. It's like, well, you're my friend, so you should do all of these things. Like, you should be all these things. And I'm like, no, people have different types of friends. And I feel like sometimes people's expectations of friends in terms of effort or what they do, all these things is like always very high. It's like, no, some friends just don't need to be that way. Sometimes it just can be very one-dimensional, and that's okay. And I find that sometimes if I explain that to people, they get confused. It's like, well, if you're a friend, it means this, and this. And it's like, yeah, but not all friends are going to be that. There's levels to that. There's different levels of friendship. Do you disagree with what I'm saying, or what do you think?
No, I think that what you're saying is useful because you've given me a lot of thoughts here, because I have noticed this pattern in people, and they're like, oh, well, they are my friend. And then they think that they need to do everything with that person. But, and I don't mean to like be describing this in an entirely like functional relationship way, but it's just different people serve different purposes. So if you're friends with, someone at school, they might be really good for studying together with them and, talking about research and whatnot. But there's nothing worse than like a nerdy academic at a bar whenever you're like attempting to have fun and like be wild. And then you're like, oh God, what's going on? Are you okay? Do I need to babysit you? You've only had 2 drinks. Calm down. Drink some water.
Right.
But yeah, no, I think so. You tell your clients this whenever they're struggling with stuff and things, or?
I mean, I dress it up a little bit. Right? I have a little bit more of some empathy. Right? But I do listen, and I say, hey, listen, I'll listen to them say all these different things, and I'll usually ask, so what are your expectations of friendships? It sounds like you have a certain idea in mind. Have you ever considered that maybe there's different types of friends, and there's different types of friends for different types of people to meet certain types of things? More so that they're thinking about it more than me just kind of opining. So yeah, but I mean, I don't know if you'd be surprised or not surprised. I mean, I initially was. People talk about this a lot. It's there's a few things that come up clinically and personally when I talk to my friends or people I know. People talk a lot about friendship. They talk a lot about sleep, how they have terrible sleep patterns. It's something that comes up a lot. It's interesting. It's really interesting how again, different types of people, different ages and gender and race and backgrounds and locations. People, talk about this, and it's a thing that is important for people.
Well, yeah, because people are what make life worth living. And having a social network is super, super important. And then especially, I don't know, I don't think it always used to be this way where you expect someone to be everything to you. Yeah. Like if they're your friend, then they do everything with you. Yeah. I think that might be that's a testable hypothesis. I think it might be more of a westernized idea.
Yeah. Well, in that way, I don't. The only access I have to anything non-Western would just be from folks that are immigrants, and then there's that whole process of assimilation or acculturation, etc., or integration. So I wouldn't know.
I mean, me either. That's why I'm thinking it's interesting, because I don't know, but that would be very unhealthy if you thought one person was supposed to be your friend and then they're supposed to be your friend in every social context and serve every sort of.
I don't think people would say that or claim that, but it does when you start to hear how it's talked about. It's like, well, I mean, this person's not going to be there for everything. It's like, well, they should be, or why aren't they? Or it's like, I mean, well, I don't know. But I just think that it's sometimes like, I wonder. So there's 2 pieces to this. So one is if one party in the relationship has different ideas or more investment, if you will, and then the other person doesn't, so it's not fully reciprocal at the same level or same intensity. And then also the same where we find these things in terms of personality differences, right? So people come into relationships in general, and they come into friendships in general with all of their fucking baggage, right? Which is fine, of sorts, but so sometimes people are looking for friendships and they don't even know it, to try and ameliorate many of their own, past, dirty laundry. Like, I didn't have this, and so I need you to be this. And, I got really, hurt in this way or whatever. And so, you're a source of stability and this and this and this. I mean, and it's just, and I don't, some people are just like, no, I don't want to do that. I just want to go to happy hour and talk about whatever. And I don't want to be your thing that I'm like having to like really like, or all the time or whatever. And some people do think that. And so sometimes there's a kind of mismatch. And then I just think that that's a hard conversation to have, right? Like, how do you tell that to somebody? If I say, Hannah, like, listen, I think you're great, and I really just need somebody to just really listen to me and talk about X, Y, and Z and all of my neuroticism and all. And it's just like, how do you have that conversation? First, I would have to have some pretty good insight into my my issues and what's going on, and then my expectations for a friendship. And people just don't cognitively, I think, or consciously think about this. And then how do you say that to somebody? And then how do you get them to like buy into that? It's like, well, I'll do the same for you. And it's like, well, maybe I don't want to do that. But I think all of this is very implicit. Like, this is going on kind of under the surface. And yeah, I think, and then when people have a falling out with their friends or they have arguments, or it's like, well, when I'm in a clinical space, I'll ask, so what was your expectations of the friendship? What was your expectations of the relationship? If it's in a personal context, I'll probably ask the same thing, but just in a different way. It's like, well, it sounds like you had some ideas here about this. Well, yeah, because they're my friends. Like, well, what does that mean to you? Well, a friend is this, and this. And it's like, is it possible that maybe that other person doesn't view friendship that way? And it might be like, yeah, but they're wrong. Or, yeah, that's not how you have friends. Or, people start to kind of double down on this stuff. And I think it's just a lot of it's in play. And again, I'm just kind of, spelling out all of these various like ways in which friendships shake out. And I just think it's really interesting. I don't know. What are any of your thoughts about any of my rambling here?
No, I like that. I think you should like write that down. Do you write for popular like culture pieces? Because
sometimes I'm so lazy about it. I'm so lazy.
Oh, same. But I think that is what goes on in a lot of friendships where people they have this idea of what an ideal friendship is, and that's
coming from somewhere, right? That's coming from somewhere. It's coming from either friendships, or they did have or did not have, or somewhere in between as they were in development.
Yes, I would agree. And it comes from somewhere because some people have better friendships than others, right? The quality of your friendships differ across individuals. And I think it can be really difficult to be friends with people who expect you to be all things, because have you heard of, I think this is called like the banker's paradox. It's like,
oh yes, I'm familiar with this. Yeah. How does it work again? Oh, I've read this.
Correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a while since I read this. It's like people want to be friends with people who are desirable to be friends with. But the people most in need of friends are the people that people don't want to be friends with.
Yes, that sounds right.
Yeah, so it's like the banker's paradox, because it's also like the people who need loans the most are the ones that you don't want to lend stuff to, because they're in super dire need and they might not pay you back. So I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to be a good friend. And then it's also difficult to have these boundaries in your friendship. And I don't know. It sounds like you're kind of talking about like my, like this is like my early 20s, like my late teenage years. I'm like, have you read my diary? What's going on here? But yeah, it can really suck, because if you have someone who expects a lot from you and you are not really getting anything out of the friendship, it kind of feels more like therapy than it does like friendship. Well,
listen, I mean, I will have young people tell me. I mean, this has happened on a few occasions. It's. I have a lot of thoughts when I hear this, and then I keep it to myself. But I'll have young people, and they might be, about to go into undergrad, or they're finishing undergrad, wanting to go into grad school, and they'll say, I think I want to go and get my PhD or PsyD in psychology. And I'll say, can I talk to you about that? And I like talking to people about, career stuff and professional development. I enjoy that. And so my first thing I usually say is, don't do that. What a terrible idea. Don't do that. It's so long and expensive, and you don't have any personal life, and you ruin relationships, and you're stressed, and if you're like me, you're going to lose your hair much faster, and it's just, I don't know, right? And I'm sort of joking, right? But they'll be like, oh, okay. And like, but they'll tell me. So I'll usually ask, well, why are you considering this? Or why do you want to maybe do this, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's in a clinical sense or a research sense or some other way. Well, I just realized that, a lot of my friends will talk to me, and I'm just really good at listening and just, helping them out. And I'm like, there's two things I always think in that moment. It's like, yikes. This person is being a kind of repository for all of their friends' stuff, which is terrible. It sounds like a one-sided friendship. But some people really enjoy the role of doing that, of being the kind of savior, of swooping in. People like that stuff, right? So, and I don't think they intentionally try to do it. I think it maybe just happens. And then second, it's like, and also that's not what clinicians do. Right? It's not what psychologists do or therapists do entirely. Listening, yes, but advice giving and telling them where they should do, I mean, that's more of a life coach, maybe sort of kind of thing. Which I have my own opinions on anyways, but so I guess I hear that though sometimes, and it's like, oh man, like that's, I don't know. And then there's like another layer. It's like, it makes me sad, right? It's just like, oh man, this person it just sounds like maybe not on the surface unhealthy, but kind of under the surface, like that's just not a great dynamic. And then is it a surprise when those relationships break down or whatever, right?
I think it's a surprise to some of the people in that friendship, but I don't think it's a surprise to everyone in the friendship. I don't know, because you do have these friendship breakups, right? And oftentimes they break up because there's either a violation of trust or a lack of reciprocity. Because if you are, the repository for all of your friends' issues, and all they do is contact you whenever they need something, or they need someone to talk to, that does not feel good. It can feel good at first because you're like, I am useful, I am valued, I give good advice. Right. But then eventually, when it just becomes obvious it's one-sided, it's like, what do you get out of that?
That and it's fatiguing, and it becomes frustrating, and then people have, I don't call it empathy burnout, but they're just like, look, I'm tired of hearing about the same things. Like you gotta figure it out. Like you gotta do it or you don't, and that way I think sometimes it can be counterproductive in the end. Which goes to what you were saying about boundaries. Friendships do, every relationship has boundaries. But I think friendships do as well. I think this would be one of them. Where is the boundary between helping and enabling? I definitely think this happens in families. I've said this before. So many people, and look, family's super important to me. It's huge for me. Really is. But I think a lot of people hide behind family to get away with murder. Well, we're family. Can you just do this? Well, can you do this? Can you help me with this? And well, of course you're going to do it because you're family. And it's like, no, you don't need to keep giving that one uncle or that one nephew or whatever, money every month because you're family. It's like, no, you're in a very bad dynamic. And this fractures a lot of types of families, and then it becomes really difficult in the holidays. And and it might not even be money, right? It might just be like, how do you, listen, or, it's like, well, you get it, or, well, your friend. It's like, yeah, but it's also like, you can't hide behind, family to, say, well, you just do me a solid, or can you tell this person to tell this person, and don't tell this person. And I think people hide behind that a lot, to to do some pretty negative, unintentionally maybe, but negative kinds of patterns of, negative feedback loops.
No, I agree. And that's interesting that you describe that. Yeah, I've seen that happen before, and I think it's also kind of the same dynamic sometimes where is this like family systems therapy where you have like, what am I thinking of? I don't know anything about therapy, so correct
Family
me.
systems it's got many different, at least 8 major sub therapies. Yeah.
So, but then you have like the person who is like the sick person or like the child, and like they're the ones who have to be like taken care of.
Yeah, it sounds like structural family therapy from Minuchin.
Okay. I know nothing about it, but I think that in itself, that dynamic can become really unhealthy, especially if people like grow up and become adults. Because if someone grows up in that role, and I'm just hypothesizing here, it's like they might then expect to continue to stay in that role and expect people to cater to them.
That's right.
Take care of them and not upset them. And then you're like, hey, you're being a baby. Like, please stop. You are 30 years old. Grow up. But you also kind of see this in friendships too. Sometimes, like the unhealthy ones, where someone wants to be taken care of. And that's not a friendship. That's like a nurse-patient sort of relationship. It's like friendships are reciprocal. They provide each other with mutual benefits. If there's not mutual exchange of benefits going on, then it's not really a friendship, in my opinion.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And that was my point. I think what you're describing is, I think they're called rigid triads, and what you're describing is the detouring, if I remember correctly. It's where one parent or both parents will either make the child or a family member a scapegoat, or they'll overprotect them and coddle them and all these things. And so there's a kind of detouring to not resolve the real issues. And structural family therapy is all about creating a better structure. So you have, different rules and norms and boundaries, and how you restructure that in ways that are healthier. So it's, I've done some work with families. It's a lot of work. And there's people that kind of specialize in that, and they do that. And it's tough. It's a lot of work because you're just dealing with like 4, 5, 6, 7 people in a room, and it's a lot. It's a lot of work.
Lots of crosstalk.
Yeah, it's a lot. Even if you have a family of 3, it's a lot. But anyways, but my whole point in bringing that up was just that how do we understand certain boundaries in friendships? And how do people agree? It's like in a romantic relationship, I think, or maybe in a family, or maybe in, whatever, like friendships also need certain boundaries as well. And I feel, there's no one size fits all in that. I mean, it's literally on each relationship. Each friendship's going to be different. But I guess I'm still curious I'm still stuck on this. I don't know what to do with it. You've put something in my brain, and I don't know what to do with it. I don't agree or disagree. It's interesting. It's just this idea. So it kind of goes offshoot of the boundaries thing, right? That makes sense that there's always a potential for sexual attraction with opposite sex friendships. I'm not denying that.
I'm not saying that there are no platonic.
No, I know you're not. I know you're not. Okay. Let me say this. Okay. I'm super practical today. I don't know why. I'm like super. I don't know. Like I'm
fine with it.
I feel like I'm so like I still have a little bit of the clinician hat on today. I don't know why.
That's fine. Maybe am I giving off distress vibes?
No. You're great. No.
Okay.
No. No, the opposite, not at all.
Okay.
I guess about that. I guess it's you would have to like. I just don't, I'm thinking about this very practically. I just don't think most friendships would even acknowledge that. Like, oh no, I don't look at this person that way. Oh, I would never, this person's dating so-and-so, or they're married or whatever. I would ever, absolutely. Most people would say that. And I think that's a bad thing.
Yeah, I think you would need to.
Because I mean, look, you don't have to be super like explicit and be like, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Right time, place, I would totally, I mean, like, I'm not saying you have to do that, but I do think there needs to be the fact that exists would then indicate that you need to be probably just more active in setting the parameters if both parties agree they don't want to do that. Now,
I would agree.
That would obviously, or I don't say obviously, but I think in Western society, yes, if people are in any type of other relationship with someone, probably need to have that conversation at some point of sorts. But even if both people are single, I think that there's something to be said for that too, right? So if you have a dude and you have a woman and they're both single, and they're friends, there probably still should be. I mean, it might be a little bit looser because it's like, well, maybe we will want to explore this, I mean, fine. But if they just want to be friends and they don't want to poison the well, quote unquote, then you would have to have some parameters. I think the parameters are definitely there if one or both parties are in a committed relationship. A committed romantic relationship is where it definitely should be. But implicit in that is acknowledging that fact. And I just think people can't even get to first base on this. That's maybe a bad analogy there, but you know what I mean? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I don't think people want to, I don't think people want to acknowledge it because it is awkward, you know, and especially if you are in this friendship and you are kind of attracted to the other person, then that makes it even more of a potential cost because you could be shut down. If you're like, hey, I kind of am attracted to you. It's hard to say that, because you might get shut down. And then that sucks. No one likes that.
No one likes that. But I mean, I think that there's in some ways it's an easy thing. Long term. Short term, yes, it sucks. Any type of rejection, it's like, I don't know. It's just, if someone's like repulsed, if they're like, oh God, no, that's terrible. That's terrible, right? It sucks. It's like, listen, I might not be that great looking, but Jesus, I mean, like, I'm not hideous, right? But also, like, I do think it would probably be interesting if both people felt that way. If someone was like, I'm gonna be honest, I'm sort of kind of there, right time, right place, etc. And if the other person said, I kind of feel the same way, it's like, it does create this weird kind of like tension. But I guess it is one of those things where it's like, okay, well, how do we handle this? But I guess the feeling is that like getting it out in the air is somehow going to like, what's that called? It's going to like make it happen or whatever. And I don't think so. I think it's one of those things where it's like, look, we can acknowledge this, that's fine. And then we can actively say, we don't want to explore that aspect of a potential. And we just are mindful of it. And then that can probably translate into certain things, right? So like, for example, maybe we don't go out and get drinks at 11 p.m. and take the same car together and I drop you off at your house. You know what I mean? Like, I think that those things probably, if you make the agreement and you make the boundaries, well, let's make it a lunch in the afternoon. And so if I have a glass of rosé at 2 p.m., then whatever, right? That's fine. That's, I don't know. There's certain then practical things, right? I mean, people can figure out what that looks like. But I'm sure people are going to listen to this, be like, oh my God, this person, I didn't know that Xavier was so traditional. Oh my goodness. Like, we live in a liberal society. And I'm not saying that. Like, look, people can do whatever they want. I'll have no judgment. But I do think that we should be honest about the aspects of being human. And our evolutionary code says we're trying to get the best possible genes into the next generation. And that's usually through sexual selection, and that's usually through sex. We obviously know what Freud said about sex and about relationships. There's definitely something there, right? You don't have to agree with all of it, but you can definitely acknowledge it. And I think if that's probably the first part, but I think that that's probably most difficult for people.
Yeah, but I just, in general, I would agree with you. I think it is the most difficult part, but I also think we should just be honest with people in general. I do this thing, someone told me about it. It's called like radical honesty. I don't know where they got it.
I've heard the term. Yeah, I've heard the term.
Yeah. So I've been doing this for like, how many years? 4-ish years now? Maybe 3? I don't know. 4 to 3 years, 3 to 4 at the top. I can't say words. But I would say, I think it makes my relationships better, like my social relationships better, when I'm just honest with people about stuff and things, but it also gets me into trouble a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, everyone's different. Everyone's going to receive it differently. Some people might be like, that's great. That was very helpful. I get it. Okay. And other people are like, I don't like her.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't like it when people don't like me. I would want everyone to love me, but it's just, I mean, especially like my friendships with women, I've noticed I've gotten better once I start voicing these things. So like if there's a social situation where, I'm with another woman out in public, or I can just like tell you this story. So my friend Summer, she was in our lab too. She's graduated now. She's like doing fancy postdoc stuff. But she's like real cute and like, little and blonde and like super, super smart. And she tends to get more attention than I do in public. Because of,
you mean physical attention?
Yes. And so at one point, we were out together and I was feeling threatened by this because I felt threatened. And, it pissed me off. And
but why? I guess I'm curious why.
Because it's a social valuation thing, So if you're in a
was it like, why aren't they looking at me too? Or is it that kind of thing? Or
yeah, and I mean that makes me sound shallow, but also it is.
I don't think so.
Well, I mean, most people would think so, but most people wouldn't admit these things. But they would just like pretend that it didn't bother them, and then it makes you seem cooler and less vulnerable if you're like, oh, nothing bothers me, I'm the cool kid.
That's right. Yeah.
But yeah, no, it upset me, and I was like, this is upsetting. And I also want attention, please. I don't want to pay for drinks. Like, this is fine. But, and then we had a conversation about it. And I was like, I'm really sorry. I felt like I was being a bitch to you because I was feeling threatened in this situation. And I'm sorry that I let this weird thing make me behave in a way, or lead me to facilitate my behavior in a way that wasn't productive and good for our social relationship. And I doubt she even remembers that. But I don't know. It's good to voice these things because sometimes we act in a way that isn't good for our friendships. And if you voice what is going on, then you can fix it, I think. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I think that I liked the point that you made about most people just try and, it's just bouncing off of me. Like, I'll bounce off of my hard armor. Look at how tough I am. And it's like, deep inside, you're like, oh, this sucks. I guess I was going to ask, like, it sounds like you're just upset at the situation and not necessarily at her, but she was like collateral damage. Like, why is Hannah in a bad mood?
Yeah. And I mean, no one wants to feel that way. Like, everyone wants to feel equally valued in social situations, or maybe even valued more than others. But no, I mean, I wasn't mad at her. She can't help being hot. It's fine. But it's just, it's like if you let these things get in the way, and if you don't address them, then they can serve as barriers. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm ranting.
No, not at all. No, not at all. I'm thinking about this. So kind of to very in the beginning when you were saying this, you were asking about how do men like tease each other or whatever, right? Or they always making fun of each other. And yeah, I mean, I think so. I guess I'm thinking here. So men don't. This is totally different for men. Like, if I'm with a dude that's objectively a stud, like he's hot, like he's got all the ladies coming after him and all the dudes coming after him. You know what my response? Now, this is just me, but I think this is true for most dudes. I could be wrong on this, but most dudes' response is going to be like, "Good job, sir." There's going to be applause, and it's going to be like, "Yes, like good for you, man." Like, and that's it. There's a sense of like shared pride almost. It's like, "Hey, man, that's cool." Again, I'm speaking kind of colloquially and kind of in more general terms, but like, I'm not going to be like, "Well, I mean, I'm not chopped liver. I mean, I look all right. I work out, and age is doing okay for me. I think. I mean, I know I'm bald, but I like it. I've leaned into it, and whatever. Right? I'm not going to think that way. But it seems that is a totally different story. Again, in the aggregate for women. So, kind of in the example you're giving, if two women go out, or maybe a bigger group of women, and one of them is objectively attractive, and they're getting all the dudes and all the women, and looking at them and saying certain things like whatever, buying them drinks, or flirting or whatever, and then the other woman doesn't, then they're going to feel really negatively. You're not doing the like, absolute, listen, fantastic. You know how many, you look at all the pool you have. Wow. Like, you're not going to say that. You're going to be like, "Hey, what's going on? Why is no one looking at me?" Do you feel that this is the case, right? Of like on the gender difference here?
I would. I'm not entirely sure why it is. Like, I could speculate that it might be because of, just in general, how women tend to compete for resources and mates versus how men tend to compete. But in general, when there is that imbalance, it is not a good for the friendship. There's a sense of rivalry there, and that can be bad for the friendship.
So yeah, this kind of brings us to the topic again I talked about with Tanya, but I'm just curious with this, why there are many aspects of female friendships that can be really positive. There's a lot of cooperation, but they're also really terrible with each other as well sometimes. Why is there this competitive nature of sorts, especially when it comes to body image, physical attractiveness, again, mate selection, all of these things? Why? And it's those things, but it's also, I think, relationally too. So I'm bringing up the physical pieces of it. Again, not every obviously woman is like this, and again, not this is kind of averages, but I mean enough so that you can see a consistent pattern. But it's like there is an emphasis on the physicality of things, which, I mean, that I don't know. It's not that men don't care about it; they do, but I don't know. Is that just where like kind of culture comes into play, and certain social norms of how someone should or is supposed to present themselves, like, and that we do focus on that. Whether we should or shouldn't is a different question, but it's a fact of sorts for now. I don't know why all this like competitiveness in the workplace, in friendships, in society. Why do women compete with each other in that way, do you think?
Compete with each other when you mean physicality, appearance? Is that what you're?
Yeah, like that. Or? There's this kind of like, not judging. I guess judging too, but comparing.
Oh, okay. Well, if you think about it, women's attractiveness is super related to status, their social status across cultures, across history, like historically. And by I mean historically, I mean like 1950s, 1930s. being attractive was like the biggest predictor of like women's social mobility. Attractiveness buys you a lot of stuff in a bunch of different domains. It's highly valued in women. And because it is highly valued across cultures, across time, and it's related to all of these beneficial aspects in general, why would they not compete on it? Is more of my question. Because they do compete on this because it buys them all of this stuff in a bunch of different social domains. So, and then you have the general dynamics of how these friendship patterns work, whereas men are more likely to work together in a group to achieve a goal, whereas the way that women tend to compete for resources is less group oriented and it's more individualistic. I would say from the research with what I'm seeing. So I think those things come into play. It's both like the dynamics of how one typically has competed for resources, which differs between male and female humans. And then you also have the fact that women's attractiveness is beneficial across a wide variety of domains. So because of those two factors, then you get women competing with one another in the workforce instead of like helping each other. Have you seen the cool, like, I think it's Joyce Benenson research about in academia, how men and women compete with each other? I'm obsessed with it.
Maybe.
So
tell me about it. I'll tell you if I remember. Maybe.
So men in academia, she did this work. I'm trying to remember the exact specifics. There's two papers that I'm thinking of. One of them has to do with co-authorships in psychology departments, I believe, where men are more likely, like high status men are more likely to co-author papers with like incoming assistant professors who are male. And then you don't get that as much when you have a high status, like female academic collaborating with a incoming.
Really?
Yeah, let me find the paper. If you.
Why do you? What's that about?
I don't think it buys you as much. Like if you think about it, so for men historically, adding another person to your coalition enhances the formidability of your coalition. So it's like the more guys we have, so we tend to compete in groups. We tend to do, inter-group competition. The more guys you have is good in general for the outcome.
So if I'm somebody lower on the totem pole in academia and I'm trying to get my research going and I have the wonderful David Buss as a co-author, I'm going to look for that. Be like, yes, let me get David. Let me send him an email. Let me say, hey, I want you to look at this. Help me out. Okay. Put your name on it. I'm golden, or vice versa, whatever work he's doing. Look, I have some stuff put out with, the wonderful David Buss and that makes me look better. And, oh yeah, like whatever, all these types of, kinds of impression management. So you're saying that with women, they're less likely to do that.
So with equal status, there's no gender difference for likelihood of co-authorship. I'm just reading straight from the abstract. But when you get full professors are more likely to, male full professors are more likely to collaborate with a male assistant professor than is a female full professor collaborating with a female assistant professor who's at a lower rank. This is why I'm doing these hand motions. But I don't know. It's interesting. It is. It's very interesting.
You would think the opposite, right?
You would, but you would also not be correct because people tend to think. Sorry, I didn't mean to be rude there.
No.
Because people think that.
No,
they're like, oh, women are so nice and supportive.
But it's like, yeah, like if you're trying to get something put out and you're like, look, I'm gonna I'm going to get Lisa Feldman Barrett to, be on my paper. That would be fantastic. So, but it sounds like it's less likely for that, if you're a young female a researcher or professor or whatever, less likely to do that on both sides, or is it just like, I don't want to be associated. I want to do my own thing. I don't want to be connected. Or how does it work there? In terms of the reasons why?
I don't think they measured the reasons why. That would be interesting. They just measured a pattern that occurred. Yeah. But I don't think they measured the reasons.
Huh.
But
it's interesting. On the paper, it's interesting because the first name that sticks out is Wrangham. That's the first thing I noticed. I was like, oh, interesting. Oh, he's on this. Okay. And obviously don't know the other two. But it's interesting how even in the meta aspect of it, there is something. I think you're right. Yeah, it's something about status. It's something about prestige and all that. And these are, I know that gets talked about a lot, but it sort of gets talked about not always in negative ways, but I think sometimes it does. Like, those are good things to want. Like, those aren't bad things. I think if you overemphasize status and not, but it's connected to something, right? It's status.
It's connected to everything.
It's a broad heuristic we use to understand the other person, because we can't take the time to get through. I mean, it's a bandwidth issue. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I know some people talk about it that way, but I think it is good. But obviously there are, I don't want to say perversions, but there are negative ways people can use that, or wrongfully use it.
Wrongful competition for status, or just wrongful competition? Sorry, I just want to make sure.
Wrongful competition for status. Yeah. That's because
everything is bad when it's done too much, right? Like a little bit of heroin might be fine. I'm joking. But like everything is bad when it becomes too extreme. Like you can die from drinking too much water. So anything you take to the extreme is typically bad. In my opinion, that's my heuristic.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would agree. I mean, I think that, you read, did you read, oh God, is it Heart? Am I getting this right? Drug Use for Adults? Is that what it's called?
Yes. No, it's, what is his?
No, that's not right. It's something like that. It was the researcher. I think he's out in New York or Columbia. I forget. Is NYU Columbia? Yeah. And he talks about how he uses all types of drugs. I think.
Yes.
Yeah. That's right. All types of drugs, recreationally and et cetera. And it's quasi controversial, I guess. But
is it? Why?
Because of all of the there's you're writing that book and you're talking about it during a opioid pandemic of sorts, and our long history with drug addiction and substance abuse and all these things. And so I guess people, there's like these old aspects of a Puritan mindset, but there are many other countries in the world that have full legalization of drugs, and they don't have high drug addiction. Which is interesting. I just don't know. I think it's interesting. I'm pretty pro recreational use. But I am also considerate of how the United States is and how. Yeah,
I don't think it would work here.
And how big it is.
Yeah.
So I think people point to Portugal. But Portugal is a very small country, doesn't have a lot of people, and they just have a different culture.
Their social relationships and social ties are stronger than ours.
Significantly. Yeah. I mean, they're yes. So, yeah. I mean, it's like that whole thing where people are like, well, the Scandinavians do this great form of socialism and universal healthcare and all that stuff. It's like, yeah, that's great, but I mean, and I think aspirationally that's good, but you're not going to copy paste that with a country that has 5 million homogenized people.
Yeah, well, I mean, they think that they can. I don't know who they are, but it's like, you got to understand the context of stuff, and not everything works everywhere. Yeah,
a lot of progressives, I mean, obviously Bernie Sanders did this. I think Liz Warren did this. Some of the bigger names, but even other people in various political caucuses would say, not copy paste, but like, look, they do it here. We should do this. idealistic way of doing that, and I agree with the ideals, but again, 330 million plus people in the fourth largest country in the world, or fourth largest country in the world. It's just not things don't scale the same way. Once you start scaling, there's things start to break down.
Yes.
So there's a big difference between 5 million people and 330 very different, very diverse people. That's one of the problems of diversity is the more you get of it, it takes longer to make decisions. It takes longer to, if you're doing it in a democratic way, it's just hard. It's hard to be like, everyone's going to have a little bit different opinion, and it's just difficult. So, okay. So yeah, I guess the last thing here on female relationships is, what do you think it is that you talked about many of the things that drive it, but I guess the one thing I want to ask is, where do you see, I guess it's hard to know, right? Because we're kind of living in it, but there's definitely a generational thing, and generations move faster now. I feel like maybe I'm wrong on that, but where do you feel with kind of the rise or stay of many of the positive aspects of women in society and in the workforce? I just read Richard Reeves' book. What's it called? Of Boys and Men, I think is what it's called.
Was it good?
It's very
good. Should I read it?
Yes.
Boys and Men?
Yeah, I highly recommend it. Short read. I think it's less than 200 pages.
Nice.
It's good. He he's at Brookings, so he it's a lot of data, but he writes well, so it's not just a data dump, which is nice. It's a really good book. And I'm not going to make the whole thing here about his case, but the point is that he makes the idea that women are doing really well in Western society, and he gives all of the facts, some of this stuff which I knew and other people have talked about, but he compiles very nicely. And his tone is nice. He's like, this is all great, we should keep doing this and more of it. He's not disparaging of that, but he's like, what's happened is that in the push for equality, we now have inequality for men now, where men aren't in the workforce. So I'm going to make this wrong, but pre-COVID, 9 million men dropped out of the workforce, and of working age or whatever that term is, and that's tremendous. Men don't have as many friends anymore. Men are not as gainfully employed. When they are employed, they don't get certain status jobs. And then in academia, it's completely flipped. For the most part, there's still a few exceptions, but for the most part, in terms of graduation rates, in terms of certain fields, he has this cool thing in there where he talks about there's been this big push for women in STEM, and there has been an increase for sure. But he talks about this acronym called HEAL, where we should have more men in places like social work, psychology, nursing, teachers, definitely teachers. And so maybe a different push, right? So much analogous kind of how we pushed, or many people have said women should be in STEM, and that's true. I think they should have the opportunity to do it if they like. We should break some of the taboos or stereotypes of men in certain professions, and it'd be really helpful if we had more men as teachers at all levels, and more men as clinicians and things like that, which I agree with. So anyways, it's just interesting how he's talked about that there is a gender gap for education. He does talk about the gender pay gap as well, things like that. So I guess my question was in terms of what are your thoughts? I mean, you can just kind of your personal thoughts as we see generations from like the 50s and the 80s and the 90s, and then now as we're in the second decade of the 21st century, where do you think the evolution of female relationships will go with friendships and things like that, or how we see some of these things about how females can be friends with males as we have a society where that's more integrated. So men and women work more together now in the workforce than any other period in history. Men and women do other things together in terms of various interests. It's more of I see an integration, right? Because, even until the 80s, women were just kind of sidelined. They weren't as involved in as many things as men were. And there's typically more women than men in terms of populations. So now as we have more integration of that, how do you think that just changes on all of these fronts in terms of our relationship dynamics? How do we understand some of these things? How do we evolve them? How do we evolve certain things on what are standards or norms for women's, beauty or body image, or emphasis on that as opposed to other things? How do you see in the future how these things continue to evolve one way or the other?
Oh, so I always do like predicting the future. I think in general, if I remember correctly, what we're seeing with younger generations is they don't really have a lot of friends in general. Like, they are one of the loneliest generations. I'm real concerned about them. Actually, to be honest, I'm very concerned about that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that.
But yeah, if we think about how these things might change in the future, if we look at social dynamics, if we continue to have a sort of gender bias with occupations where most women are going into certain fields, and like, for instance, in psychology, it's 80, you said 80%?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so if we have more women going into certain fields than we have men, and then if men tend to go into certain fields, then we won't really see any sort of change unless anything changes. I believe when you do have more workplaces that are more diverse in terms of gender, you'll probably have more cross-sex working friendships. I don't know if those count as like real friendships, though. We could argue about that. But I don't know. I think you could potentially see a rise if you have people in more gender diverse workplaces. You would see a rise in cross-sex friendships, which would be good. But I also don't know if that is going to change because people tend to want to go into certain careers based on certain aspects of themselves. Like, I don't know. I would love for there to be more men in education. I think we really need men in education. But I don't think that field pays very well. So you just don't tend to see a lot of men going into that because it's not a very lucrative field. I don't know if that's the main reason, but it is not a very lucrative field. If you changed the norms for pay, you might see more men entering the field. Or we could also see a reverse. If we see more men entering the field, then they might rally for better pay. I think we've seen that with a couple disciplines where you had that gender flip.
Well, yeah, and I think that's the piece of it, right? Is, I mean, it could change, but I just don't know if it will. I mean, I don't think that this data point explains everything, but I definitely think it explains some things, which is, on average, men are more interested in things. I mean, that's just how it is. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. This is what we
find.
Yeah,
it's not a value judgment. It's just descriptive
cross-culturally data. Through time. That's what we just find, and that's fine. But I think this has been done in certain countries. If you literally have kind of equal opportunity. Like you can literally be compensated well. You could do anything in any of the professions. More often than not, you see women working in fields where it's more involved with people. So certain in the healthcare field and education. And even if you change those norms, I just still don't think that's the case. I mean, you're going to have, I'm the weird one, right? I always say this, like, I'm more interested in people than things like this. I'm not in the average, right? That's just how I've been for, since I was a kid. But, there are certain things I am interested in that are not people related. But it just on average though, when I talk to most people, most men, they don't want to work with people. I just don't.
Yeah.
And again, that's not, but or they want to work with people in different ways, So
Yeah.
are they going to want to work with kids and children in an education system? I would say a lot of men, even if you were paying them $200,000 a year, I just don't think that they would want to do that in mass. Like maybe, I don't know. I think that's kind of the thing that you've seen in STEM with women. It's like, yeah, there's been an uptick, and yeah, I think people should have the opportunity to do whatever they want, right? I think in terms of vocation or job, it shouldn't feel like you're held back or it's less opportunity. Like, I just think a lot of women just aren't interested. They're just not interested in it. That's fine. Like, I don't think that's a bad thing. I just think it just is. I will say on the other side of things, you don't want anything 90-10, 80-20. You just don't. It's not kind of like what you're saying. Like, you're going to have that has impact, especially if you're serving all people, right? I can't think of an example at the moment, but if it's something that's just for women or just for men, like, I don't know, like maybe that's different. But if it's something like teaching or nursing or whatever, and this just you're serving all people, men, women, everybody. Yeah, you're going to want that to be a little balanced. You're not going to want it in either direction 90-10 for sure, because that has structural implications at some point. But that doesn't mean everyone's gonna. So should we have women that are engineers and they're building stuff? Oh yeah, 100%. Which I don't think you can force people to want to like it either. So
that's my big contention too. Is it's like I want people to do what they want, and I don't think we should force people to do something that they don't want to do.
Yeah. And so I think that's the thing, right? It's like, do you legitimately have the opportunity and the accessibility to do it? And if you do, great. And then just see where, see where things fall, see where things are. And I've talked about this a little bit for the current generation, the Gen Zs. And it's just really interesting when they look out into the world and they think, what can I do? Right? It's pretty bleak.
Yeah.
It's not how it was even when I was their age, 20 years ago or whatever it was. Or is that right? Jesus. Yeah, that's right. So, it's different now. It's like, okay, college looks, higher education looks less and less of a promising opportunity, mostly because of the quality and because of student loans and because of, do you really learn a lot of stuff? What can I use this for? Is it going to financially, is that a good commitment to do that? And then with information, it's like I could know all that stuff. So now I'm really just doing letters after my name and a piece of paper and X amount of money. And I learned half of this stuff on the internet. That's how people feel. Whether it's true or not is beside the point. So certain trades are either going extinct or they're being phased out, or they're not paid well. And their various trades aren't they're not as respected in the United States as they are maybe in other countries. So, there's
Like teaching?
no, like, oh, you're going to be a plumber.
Oh, dude, they make so much money.
I know they do.
Like here.
I know
like,
I know they do. Yes. I mean,
yeah.
Oh, you're going to be a framer. Oh, you're just, but then that has a shorter half-life too, right? You're not going to be framing houses when you're 55, right? So
hopefully not. That'd be really bad for your back.
You can't even really get to 40 at that. I mean, it's just tough. But anyways, the point is, where's that piece? And then there's the other stuff where, like I said, people just don't work, or they're doing other things. I'm a YouTuber, I'm an influencer, I'm on Twitch stream, I'm on Discord, I'm on, whatever. And those things aren't necessarily bad, but it's just interesting when teenagers and older adolescents and young adults, they look out into the world. It's much different, I think, now in terms of like, what's my buy-in here to do this? Why would I do all of this time in school? Or why would I spend all this money? Or why would I do something that's hard on my body? I don't know. It just seems different now than it was even when I was younger. I don't know how you see it, but
yeah, I think we can see a lot of stuff now because we have social media and like the internet, and people, they talk about their careers and their professions, and yeah, like, I mean, I don't know are you on TikTok? I try not to be, but
no.
Oh my God, no! It's a trash dumpster fire.
I have I have a 15-year-old, so I see it and I don't understand it. I feel very old. I don't understand it. It's too much stimulus. Honestly, it's too much.
Yeah.
There's too many things going on on such a small screen.
Yes.
I remember one day she showed me, look at this, and I said okay, and I go to look at it, and like it had already changed all the. I was like, what am I looking at? And it's like, well, this here, and I'm like, it's gone. I don't know where it is. It's like something in the right hand corner, right in the center. Then it's changing. It's moving. I'm like, I don't know what I'm looking at. It's just like, it's like so many things. I don't know. So I know I'm the old person now, but it's fine. But it's, yeah, I don't get the appeal. I don't get it. But
yeah, but like you get those. I don't know. It's almost like what careers are being portrayed to them as sustainable and enjoyable. So like during the pandemic, that was really, really rough for a lot of educators. So you would have, I don't know. I'm thinking out loud here. It's just, I remember educators, like even on my social media, talking about how difficult it was. Mm-hmm. And now we're kind of seeing the great resignation from academia a little bit, where people that I never would have expected to just leave are just exiting because it just isn't worth it for them.
Yeah, so, on all levels. I mean, on all levels, and it's, I don't know. It's really worrisome, especially how fast it's happening and where it has potential to go. I mean, I know so many. I mean, I know you do too. Probably so many colleagues that are in academia, either on the research side or on the professor side, and it's just so. It's just like, we're not getting paid. We can't do anything. Students have various issues. Obviously, there's the institutional kind of thing with some of the ideological capture in many ways on some issues. There's that piece of it. There's just a lot of problems. There's like structural problems. There's financial problems. One of the things I've talked about with my friend Nicole Barbero is her idea is that if you fix quality education instead of all the like bells and whistles of things, people will come. There's some investment there. Like if I can get something only here that I can't get on YouTube or on various websites, okay, I'll do it. But if it's like, no, we're gonna pay for the student union building, or, really nice vending machine, or, whatever, really awesome website, or whatever the things are. And they're just hating class, and, everything's done by adjuncts, and nobody cares about it, and everyone's disgruntled. Well, then you're not going to have people that do it. And I definitely agree with that. I know some people disagree with that, but I definitely agree with that.
Who would disagree with that? What do they think you need to fix? More bells and whistles?
No, I think more people. I'm trying to think who. I just read something recently that was like, it's not just about quality education. You could have quality and still have problems. I'm like, well, yeah, obviously, but it was more dismissive of that argument. It was more of all the structural things. You have to fix all the educational structures, which is true. But it's like, if you fix that, then it kind of just filters down, and you'll have better quality because then of how hiring, and then how they have certain practices, and how you have, which is fine. I mean, I don't disagree with that either, but at the end of the day, I think you need to give, people that really want to teach and they really want to do it. You have to compensate them, and you have to give them sort of the freedom to do that. So sure, I mean, I guess there's some structural things there, but I think if you do that enough, you will have students that will stay, and they'll want to say, this is a good investment for me. But it's problematic. So I don't know where it goes. So yeah, so when I look at the current generation, I get worried. They're more lonely, they're more kind of siloed off. Social media is great in some ways, but it doesn't give the connection in face to face and in person as much. Too many shortcuts, and yeah, it's just, you have a generation of young people. They're so smart, and they're bright, and they could create and innovate and all these things, and it just doesn't feel like it's being poured into or fostered in a way that maybe it was in generations past. I don't know.
I worry about that. I don't know what the solution is, though. I do wish that higher education would focus more on quality teaching. It doesn't really seem like that's the focus.
Yes, I would agree.
And I don't know why, because if you look at like data about what students are looking for when they go to a college, most of them are looking for high quality education, like good relationships with professors, people who can mentor them.
Yep.
But if you don't value that, and if you don't reward that and give time for someone to develop that, then what you will have is, you will have people who are good at their jobs, you will have them leave. They will leave, or they will burn out. And it's just, this is a little bit frustrating to see this, because I worry that we are going to see a exodus of really good, solid people just leave because they don't want to deal with it anymore.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the trickle down effect of that, of what that does economically, what that does in the workplace, what that does, also, interpersonally. I mean, the best thing about academia is it's still an aspect of building social relationships between men and women, obviously, or men and men, or women and women, or whatever. But it's also, how do you really exercise that new part of your brain of analytical reasoning, abstraction, executive functioning, at such a pivotal moment in development, and then how you're engaging with all these different ideas. And yeah, I mean, I think that's, you don't want to lose that, in a kind of structured way of sorts, and or fill it with bullshit. Which also happens.
What do you mean by bullshit? Let's get specific here.
Well, I think that if you're filling it with a lot of buzzwords, I think if you're filling it with a lot of ideology that was made up 5 years ago, I think if you're filling it with, a lot of things of like, I have a heuristic, and so if you don't fit into this, we'll cancel you, or, we don't study big thinkers anymore because they were racist or sexist or something like that. You can talk about that, and that's fair.
Oh, well, are you trying to get me canceled? Because like I'm fine with it. I've already I'm fine with being canceled. It's all good.
Yeah,
I've
no,
made my peace with it.
Yeah, so
It's happening.
I had this conversation with somebody recently about Heidegger, and we talked all about his philosophy and stuff, and I've talked about his philosophy a lot here, and I'm a big fan of his philosophy. I like his philosophy a lot. And towards the end of the conversation, we just kind of talked about, I mean, you can't talk about Heidegger and not talk about how he was a part of the Nazi Party and all that stuff. And we talked about it honestly, and at the end of it, we were just like, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't study his ideas, right? Like, his contribution to philosophy was not necessarily removed, because you can't remove a person from their ideas per se. There's a nice debate about that, but you should still study Aristotle, even if he was racist. You should study Hegel, even if he was, or listen to Wagner, even if they were anti-Semitic. You should read Heidegger, even if he was part of the Nazi Party. I just don't think that you should totally X out all these things, and it's this flattening of people to
one dimension.
Yeah, one dimension, and that's it. And so it's like, okay, well, if you do that, you won't read anybody. You won't listen to anything. You won't watch anything. Right? So obviously there are limits to this stuff. I get it. I mean, I'm not saying we should just turn a blind eye to stuff. I'm not saying that at all. But I think you have to understand things in their time, understand things in their context, talk about it, engage on it, but then also engage on the thought or the piece or whatever it is, what you can understand from the author's intent, and then any of the interpretive pieces you want to, kind of pour into it as well. So, I mean, I just, when you hear these stories from academia of like, they're not reading Charles Dickens anymore, or they're not, engaging with these philosophers, or they're not looking at this artist because, he was, had some really weird, sexual preferences or whatever it is. And it's like, we're going to lose a lot of that stuff. I don't think we need to glorify them maybe as other people have in the past, but I think we can have a very honest conversation of like, maybe they weren't the best person, but they did all these other things. And how do we just kind of have two things in our head at once? And then if you look at it and you say, well, that's probably how I am and other people I know. They've probably done some really fucked up things, and they're also a good dad, or they're a good neighbor, or whatever, right? I mean, it's, we're not the total summation of our behaviors and experiences. There's more in the in-between that kind of, lubricates that. It's not just a series of those things, and that's the whole human experience, right? So
yeah, and I mean, I would agree. As I'm in the field of psychology, so whenever I think about this, like, oh, should we do this? Should we talk about this person? And, this person has problematic things in their past.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, yes, we should talk about this, but also I don't know if necessarily we need to. How am I trying to say this? It's like, I feel like there's this weird thing in science where we tend to glorify the individual scientists instead of talking about the process of science.
Yeah.
And I find that annoying, because it's like, oh, this one person did this one thing. And I'm like, and their grad students and their social network. And I don't know. It's like science is nowadays it's very team oriented. Mm-hmm. So I just don't understand the emphasis on one person, but now I'm kind of digressing.
No, it's fine. No, I understand. I mean, I think something in our field is like, you should study Galton. Like, what he did for psychometrics is like super important, but like also he was eugenicist. Like, sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, I talk about that to my intro psych classes, and then they're just like, what are you talking about? And I was like, yeah, no, like, let's just talk about it. And I don't know, they find it interesting, I think. And then they remember like what
of course, yeah,
correlations are. right? Because then you're contextualizing it. So it serves a purpose. I'm doing good pedagogy here.
That guy that was, thinking about inferior races, but he did have correlation. Every time you're running a correlation, you're going to think about this guy. I totally agree with you on that. I think that's what's, it's important to keep teaching things and all parts of it, not glorify certain people, kind of have a kind of neutrality to it of sorts. And then in terms of learning about it, and then you can make whatever attributions about it later. And then what that means for, people still, people are still human, and we're still going to have people that make a mistake, or, there's one part of them that's maybe not the best, or, whatever, it's pretty ugly. And they can also have contributions as well. And it's like, well, how do we keep wrestling with that problem we've been wrestling for hundreds of years? How do we keep, figuring out how to do that? And I don't think the answer is they did one bad thing, fuck them. We don't learn about any of the other things. That the rest of their brain doesn't matter. It's like, okay, we're not going to progress in the society anymore. And it's also interesting because a lot of other places don't do that. They're like, yeah, we acknowledge that and we condemn that. And they also contributed some things that we should also be interested in. Other places do that. And so I think that we're just putting ourselves kind of, at a disservice and a couple steps back. If the rest of the world is not doing that, but we are, that's not so good either.
Yeah. Obviously I don't like the bad stuff, but also if I make a mistake, and I make so many mistakes, but I would like someone to give me the benefit of the doubt and not write me off entirely.
Of course. Of course.
And we can acknowledge mistakes and awful things while still being like, oh, well, this guy was awful, but he still invented this useful thing. Mm-hmm. So we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. He was into this dark stuff, but also now statistics, huzzah, right?
Right. Something we use all the time. And I'm glad we have that from him and other people, their personal persuasions aside. So, I think that's obviously helpful. Okay. So I guess the next topic here that I want to ask you about, because I know you've looked at this and researched this, I'm assuming maybe taught on it too, is about disgust. You mentioned it in the beginning about some of your interest there. So I guess just tell me, how was your interest with disgust specifically? It's a whole system, if you will, and then we can talk about some of the more finer points of it.
Yeah, so I find disgust really interesting because it kind of serves two purposes. Because you think about, from an evolutionary perspective, disgust exists as a pathogen avoidance mechanism in general, avoiding things that might contain stuff that's going to make you sick, avoiding people that might either make you sick because they're coughing everywhere. Like my undergrads in class, oh my gosh, it's like a chorus of coughs constantly. It's great. No offense to them, but it's just like I start handing out cough drops. But yeah, avoiding people who are going to make you sick, avoiding people who it is not good to become in social contact with or to be socially affiliated with. That'd be more of the moral disgust aspect. And then also it provides a signal to other people about your qualities. So I find that aspect the most interesting, is the signaling function.
Yeah. So you've talked about, the way that I understand is the kind of three is the basic disgust, which you're talking about, pathogen avoidance, the moral disgust, and sexual disgust. But what is it about the signaling piece? Maybe you talk about that in terms of what about that piece of it is interesting to you.
Oh, because people use disgust language commonly in their day-to-day lives. And so, for instance, let's say you're eating some food and there is hair in it. So you are at a restaurant and, you take a big bite of your food and then you're pulling your pizza out of your mouth or whatever it is. And there's just this hair. So that is nasty. But
yes,
then,
it is.
Yeah, I hate it.
No disagreements on my end over here.
But like how much disgust you display says something about you as a person.
Yes. I got what you're saying now. That's a good example. Yes. Yes, because there's obviously like a continuum here, right? So like if somebody is like, whatever, and they just keep eating, somebody be like, what? Like, that's terrible. Like, you're just gonna like blow it off or like whatever. Like, that's weird. And then you have people that are like absolutely like dramatic about it. It's like, I want my full meal covered. I don't want to pay anything. And I'm gonna leave this placement, and I'm gonna write a bad review, and I'm not gonna eat the rest. Like, whatever, right? Just the most extreme of it. And then everywhere in between. So you're saying that this has some type of signal of what that could potentially say about the person, or just say about what their response is to that event, or what is it saying?
It says something about you and your personal qualities to other people who are observing it.
Mm-hmm.
So I have some work that I should be resubmitting for publication, but it's just been a wild year. But showing that people who display more disgust are seen as being higher in status. So social status, if you display disgust, people think you're higher in status than if you don't display disgust. And then they expect high status people to be more likely to be disgusted by this stuff in general. And it also says something about like masculinity, right? So if you display disgust, people think you're less masculine.
Really?
Yeah. So I have some interesting work on.
So like,
well, I think it's interesting.
Guys are supposed to just like, that's interesting. So they're just supposed to like take more of this, and if they don't, like if they show too much disgust, then it's what?
They think that they're feminine. So if you display disgust in general, if I just have like a gender neutral vignette, a little story where it's like, oh, this person did this thing, and then they were super disgusted. People are like, oh, that is a woman. And if the person is not disgusted, people think it's a dude. But yeah, it's closely linked to like perceptions of masculinity and stuff associated with masculinity. I think we have like a DV that's like, how much do you think this person can bench press? And if you display disgust, people are like, oh, that's a weakling.
Wow, it's interesting. I mean, it definitely feels uncomfortable.
What do you mean? Does it feel uncomfortable? Why?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a terrible way to think. Like, oh, if you have more disgust, or excuse me, less disgust, right? That you're more feminine. That's terrible. That's putting women in a terrible way.
If you have less, hold on, let me make sure that we're getting this right. So if you have less disgust, if your disgust is low, people think you're more masculine.
Sorry, the other way. Sorry.
Okay, so if you have more disgust, people think you're more feminine. Well, yes. And I mean, there are in general sex differences in disgust, right? These exist in the world. So men
it feels like a pejorative though.
Does it? Why? I mean, I like this reaction. I find this reaction interesting.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's a weird thing to say. If you have more disgust, you're more feminine, or you're just seen as weaker.
People think you are, is what my data would suggest.
I mean, I'm not disagreeing with the data.
No, it's fine. Let's disagree. It's all good.
I'm not disagreeing with it, but it's just that's a, I don't know. That's just such a. I mean, well, it's just to me. It says that like, oh, maybe it's not saying this. Maybe I'm just this how it's being perceived is like that women are inferior in some ways. That like, oh, it's weaker to like have more disgust. Like you should be tougher, or you should be like able to handle it more, or something like that. I guess my main question is how do we see that? Like obviously, like how do we get at the like more that that idea that if you have more disgust, it's a feminine thing. It feels like it's a negative, but is it not a negative? It's just how maybe I'm reading it wrong.
No, I think you're picking up on something that is interesting and could potentially be an idea there. So I like that. I like it when people have reactions to stuff. Then it gives me ideas. But so if we think about how this works, when you feel disgust, what you are essentially feeling is like this thing is going to potentially infect me if we're talking about pathogens, right? So women in general do tend to be more easily disgusted than are men. I think this is true across cultures also. I'm not sure how large this effect is. And also women are in general not as strong as are men.
Right.
So I think what it's picking up on here is, and I mean, men do different disgusts as well.
Yes.
But like, I think what we're picking up on is more so an aspect of maybe trade-offs, if you will.
Okay.
Trade-offs in, like, do I have to put up with this gross thing? Like, can I put up with this gross thing, or does it impose too much of a cost to me? I don't know. And then how that might differ by sex. I'm not sure if this makes sense.
No. It's very clear. I guess I'm asking the question you're not supposed to ask, right? Is why is that the case that women, have more of a disgust feature?
Than do men.
Yeah, than men. Because like I can get the whole strength thing and all that stuff. I mean, that's just physically obvious. I mean, that's on Earth too. Maybe the women are more physically stronger and the men aren't, or whatever. Like I don't really care about that. I mean, it's relevant, but it's just physically obvious, right? I mean, it's just physically obvious. But
why does disgust differ?
Well, I guess
really know.
I guess the reason I'm just having a strong reaction with that is that it's because disgust is a system, or
yes.
It's an emotion, but it's more than an emotion, right? It's definitely a kind of an internal emotional working system, and we all have that. We all have disgust, obviously, but that would be qualitatively interesting if one emotion and or let's say emotional system loaded more or less for one gender than the other. Like, I don't know if that's the case for other emotions. It might be. I've never thought about it in that way. I don't usually do sex differences with with a lot of things, not because it's not important, but just because it gets so everyone's always saying that one's better than the other, and I know that's not what it is, but I just
but
find
different doesn't mean better, right?
No, I know that, but it's for non-academics. That's how they read it, right? But I guess it is weird. I guess the thing is like I wonder if there's other because okay. Here's what it is. Okay, here's what it is. Okay, for so long, people have said that women are emotional. Right. And they use it as like a negative thing, like you're weak, you just emotion. And the opposite, right? That men to be strong is to not show emotions. Right. Now, obviously, I think if you're taking a purely evolutionary perspective on this, I could see some of that like in our hunter-gatherer days. And I think maybe some of that translates to now. But I think that's in a modern society not helpful to say, don't express your emotions, don't feel emotions except anger or whatever. And that you should be able to feel pride, shame, embarrassment, guilt, distress, happiness, sadness, joy, anger, jealousy, envy, regret. Like you should be able to, you're a human being. You should be able to feel those things and express them just like women do. And there's not a, oh, if you're more emotional, you're weaker. So I guess maybe that's the reaction I'm having. It's like, oh, there is an emotion here that's showing up to say, well, if you have more disgust, you're just feminine, and almost in a way of like you're weaker. I don't know. That just seems weird for me. I don't know. Am I making sense now?
No, I get it. People do in general get weird whenever you start to talk about something that could portray women in what seems to be maybe a negative light, or potentially could be viewed as, perpetuating a stereotype, right?
Yes, although that's not necessarily my issue with it. My issue is I'm fine with there's differences in how men and women interact with certain emotions or certain things. That doesn't bother me. And it could be more or less, right? But like, that doesn't bother me. It's maybe it is just like kind of like a cultural loading of like the idea of like a potential like negative valence there of like, oh, to have more disgust is to be more feminine, which is potentially more negative, but maybe I'm wrong on that.
No, I get it because we tend to see. Let me make sure I'm tracking this. Okay, so cultural loadings. If we tend to associate these things with maybe being less socially desirable, then there's a reaction there, right? And it's like, oh, is this a negative? Is this a positive?
Well, I guess it says to me is like, it would be, again, these are generalities, right? It's not everybody, but it would be saying, if you have more disgust, you have. Now, this might be a leap, so I could be totally off here. You're just more neurotic. Like, you just can't control it.
More neurotic.
Right. Now, I do know that's true, and that doesn't bother me, but I'm just saying, like, when you're adding all these things together, it's just like, oh, like, you're in certain situations, you're not dependable, you're not reliable, because you have so much disgust. You can't handle it. Whereas a dude is going to have less disgust, and okay, there's negatives to that too, right? Maybe they're not as expressive of these things or whatever. But I guess it just has like a lot of potential aspects of it that could be negative in social situations, where it's like, oh, don't show her that because she's just not going to be able to, or whatever. Like it's going to be that kind of thing where it's like you can't handle your own emotional states. Now, I could be reading all into this, and that's what I'm trying not to do. But that's just, if my mind goes there of like that correlation, it's like, okay, well, that's what it seems to be saying, but maybe I'm wrong on this. And for the record, I don't think any of those things. I'm just saying like where my mind goes with it. Right. Yeah.
Well, and I could see that as being a reaction. And so it's good that I know this now. So whenever I attempt to submit this for publication, that would be a good thing to know, that might be a potential reaction that I would get, and that I should probably attempt to ward that off at the start.
But help me understand it. Like, fix my heuristic here. How can I get a more accurate understanding of this? Or maybe it's just my my perseveration.
Oh, it's all good. So, do we in general find like sex differences in neuroticism? Do you know that?
Yeah, of course. Women are higher in neuroticism, men are lower on average.
Mm-hmm. And this in general, would you argue that might be adaptive, actually?
I see them as they are.
They are? What do you mean?
So, like, the fact that women are higher on average, higher in neuroticism, could have good or bad aspects to it, and the fact that men on average are a little bit lower than it could have good or bad aspects to it.
Okay,
that's how I see it in my head.
That makes sense. So when I'm talking about this, what I'm thinking about is, so there's some research showing that the sex difference in neuroticism it's driven by physical strength. So if we throw in physical strength as a mediator here. And this is Nick Carey's work, who I love dearly. So, because he's a really solid scientist. So this relationship between, biological sex and neuroticism is driven by strength. So the argument here is that it might in some way be adaptive to be, and by adaptive, I'm not meaning good or bad. I'm just meaning it functions, it works. So if I'm out at nighttime, walking to my car, it's probably good for me to be a little bit neurotic because I'm not that big. Like I'm 5'7",
that's actually tall for, I think, isn't the average woman 5'4", 5'5"?
Yes, I'm tall for a woman, which is great, and I like to wear heels to be very dominant, which is also great. But I digress here. So the idea is essentially that no one really knows why sex difference exists in disgust. First of all, there's some arguments that it could be related to differences in parental investment. There's some arguments that it could be related in general to differences in risk sensitivity, where women are just more sensitive to risks and therefore more avoidant of potential contaminants than are men. But so if we take this risk thing a bit further, and if men in general in certain domains are more likely to be okay with risks, then you can think of risk as eating a sandwich that's been sitting out for maybe a couple hours. And you're like, oh, well, here's this sandwich. It has been sitting out, might have mayonnaise on it. So what you going to do? You're going to risk it?
Nope.
I don't know. Once we were at a dinner and there was it was a fancy restaurant. It was for someone's birthday. I think it was for Randy's birthday, my old lab mate. He'll hate me for telling this story. I don't know, but I'm going to tell it anyway. So Jeff Gasson, pretend I didn't say his last name, Jeff, our lab mates, there was salsa spilled on the table. And we were like, hey, Jeff, we'll pay you $5 if you just lick this up off the table. And, Jeff was like, really? $5? And then he did it. And then some other dude was there, who I guess is not the type to lick up salsa off of the table. And he just gave him a disgusted look, but I don't think Jeff noticed. So Jeff, if you're listening to this and you're finding that out now, I'm sorry. But I don't know. It just, I'm
that's
thinking
a different, but that's a different context though. Right?
Just, what do you mean a different context? In public, the amount of disgust that you're showing, or just in general?
So I think both actually. So,
okay.
But it's not just a public thing, although it's connected. There's an incentive, there's peer pressure, there's a public setting. That's different from right. Do I have the tuna sandwich that's been out for 4 days? It hasn't been put away. It hasn't been refrigerated. Am I going to eat that? That's risky. No, I'm not going to do that. Now, some people may. It's whatever. It's all fine. Whatever. It's going to the same place. I'll be fine. No big deal. So, yes, I could see that probably on average men would be that way. But in another context, though, where it's a dare and there's an incentive and there's a whole thing, I could see that maybe that person normally wouldn't do that. But if there's all these other factors to it, then there's then it becomes this is where I think, obviously men are more risky or more prone to take risks than maybe women are. The reasoning for taking the risk is not going to be, oh, whatever, fuck it, I'll do it. It's more of, no, I want to there's a kind of signaling here. I want to show that I can do this, or I can show that whatever, I'm not going to back down from it or something like that. Whereas maybe other people might be hell no. So I wonder if those variables come into play more than just a more, forgive the pun, sanitized environment. So I don't know if those aspects are, I love your story. It's hilarious, but I wonder if those aspects are also key variables there.
Well, definitely, because if we're arguing that disgust is a social signal of something, then the social nature of the situation would obviously play a role. However, I would argue and I'm not sure if I'm answering your question correctly or if I'm picking up on what you're saying. So stop me if I'm not. But I would argue in general that if you are going to avoid something that is potentially dangerous, we should find this more so in people who are more susceptible to danger.
Mm-hmm.
So these would be people who will probably happen to be women, people who
Mm-hmm.
might be in general have more what we think of as feminine physiological characteristics, like less strong, etc.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yes, it does make sense. I guess I'm curious here. Maybe it's connected, maybe it's not. So you tell me if it is or isn't. But I don't do this stuff. I really don't. I'm just kind of thinking out loud about how I hear counter arguments to this stuff. People get very uneasy about determinate qualities, sex differences of between X, Y, and Z or whatever. As if it's this immutable, determinate, whatever thing. I don't feel that way. I don't really care. I care of sorts, but I just don't have a reaction in that way. My reactions are for other things. But I guess my question here is how much does the environment play? Because then you'll see these people that'll say, well, it's just all environmental things. This is how they were raised. This is how they grew up. It's all conditioning, social conditioning, blah, blah, blah. And obviously there are elements of that as well, of course. But how much do you see that playing a part in some of the differences with disgust?
Oh, so that is a good question. So, of course, the environment matters. Nothing ever occurs in a vacuum. The environment always matters. And the affordances that are in the environment are going to influence the extent to which you can use disgust to do its function, if you will. So if you're in a real gross environment, disgust doesn't really buy you anything. So you should, in general, we would see it as being functional to decrease your disgust in order to better allow you to meet your other relevant goals in that environment. So if disgust isn't going to buy you anything because you can't avoid interacting with gross stuff, you should, in general, it would be adaptive for the disgust emotion to be reduced. So I have some work showing that if we put people in a dirty room, they report like slightly lower disgust in response to gross images, but it's a really small effect size. These were also with TCU college students who, they don't, on average, probably don't have to encounter environments that are real nasty all the time. But I think Carlotta Bartraz, I don't know if I'm saying her name correctly, she looked at people entering a military training camp. That's like a real harsh environment in general, so I hear. And she tracked their disgust longitudinally across their training experience, and their disgust lowered. Also, if that makes sense.
It does. I guess I agree. I think obviously the environment is important. I think it's always, it's this whole like how much is more and less. I think it really is sometimes circumstantial. I guess going back to the thing about the signaling piece, this is a little bit of a nuance. I'm forgetting where I've talked about something similar to this. It will come to me. But what about maybe it was with Colton. I can't remember. It's going to drive me nuts. But what about in viewing fiction? So maybe you haven't, done any research, but, just your fresh thoughts on this. So, for example, if, because you're a woman, you're going to have more disgust. I'm just kidding.
Well, on average, yeah, I think the effect size is like an average.
I'm going to have less disgust. But so let's say you and I, we watch a movie. And we watch a movie and it's about whatever. I don't know. Just a thriller or something. I don't know. Just nothing that would would note that there you should expect something, right? And let's say there's a scene that comes in the movie, right? Someone's eating somebody's intestines or something. I don't know, right? There's something really awful, right?
What movie is this? I need to watch this. Sounds good.
I don't know which movie it is, right?
Okay.
The Human Centipede. No, I'm just kidding. And so and my reaction is kind of like, oh, okay, and just watch it. Okay. And you're over there like, your hands over your face. You're like, oh my God, I can't watch this. This is so gross. And then you look over at me and you're like, why are you having this reaction? This is so gross. This is so awful. How could you not do that? Does it work that kind of way? Paul Bloom. Sorry, I'm all over the place. Paul Bloom. That's when I was talking to Paul, we talked about, I believe it's what we talked about here. We talked a little bit about empathy and how you view it in films or whatever, and how it's like there's a simulation aspect, so you can actually have more empathy. So I'm kind of, maybe that's where my head's going with this. It's like, does this work the same way? Like, obviously IRL, right? If you're out at dinner with somebody and the hair, or they find a fingernail in there or something really gross, right, in their food. Or it's the paw print on your burger at McDonald's somewhere. You hear these stories every now and then. This is so gross.
Oh, gross. Oh, yeah, nasty.
It's
no.
super gross. Yeah, these stories come out every now and then, right? Anyways, that's different, or that's my question. Is there a difference in if you're doing it like kind of in person at a dinner or something with somebody in real life, as opposed to watching a fictional account of something so it's not real? We know it's not real. It's a movie. You can just turn it off and it doesn't exist anymore, at least for your eyes in that moment. Is there a difference in how we're using the signaling of how people respond to certain disgust features based on whether it's a fictionalized account or whether it's something that's actually happening? Is there a difference?
Oh, interesting. I don't know if I have the data to speak to that. What is your just kind of fresh thoughts on it, I guess? Okay. So what I usually study is social perceptions of others. So if someone does this thing, how do we view them?
Yeah.
But I would in general argue that, let me rearrange your question to make sure that I'm understanding it correctly. So you are asking, does this function differently if we are encountering something gross right in front of us versus if we are watching a fictionalized account of it?
Right. So basically the same thing, just that's the only difference, that if two people are watching a movie and one person has a reaction to it and someone has a lesser disgust reaction to it, does that other person have an attribution based on their higher or lower disgust reaction to the fictionalized account as opposed to, something happening in real life?
I don't know. I think it's good. I think that's cool. I think that's interesting. I would argue it would operate similarly. So I think if you're easily disgusted in real life, I think, IRL, I think you would also be more easily disgusted if you watched a movie about intestine eating.
Right.
Now I'm obsessed with that. Now I kind of want to watch this movie. I'm real obsessed with gross stuff. Have you seen those pimple popper videos?
Oh God, it's so gross. Oh gosh.
I am obsessed with them. I don't know why. Oh my God, have you seen?
I've heard other people that are obsessed with this too, and I cannot understand that. I can't understand it, but I can also I can watch really gory stuff and it doesn't bother me.
What about mango worms? Have you ever seen a mango worm, skin parasite infection?
Ooh.
Do you know what tryptophobia is? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
No, what is it?
It's fear of small holes in a pattern. Some people are.
Oh no, that doesn't bother me. That doesn't bother me. Yes, I know what you're talking about. That doesn't bother me. No.
But
no.
Mango worms, I just found this out a month ago, and I'm obsessed with it. I watched videos one Saturday for maybe 4 hours. It really screwed up my YouTube algorithm. But mango worms, they live in the tropical areas, and they're these skin parasites that bore into your skin, and they make these small holes and then like it's literally like a worm in a hole under the skin, and it is wild, and it's wild, and I'm just like obsessed with it.
I don't have. I would say like there's some. I'm trying to think. So I have a pretty high tolerance for stuff. I don't get squeamish, but there are a few things though that will bother me. I have to think about things that like, where do I avert my eyes? Yeah, I definitely don't like bugs under the skin. I can watch it, but it doesn't. I don't love it. I think. I'm sure there's categories for it, but like when I see people eat like live animals.
No, that's just mean. That's just inappropriate.
No, it's mean, but like people that eat like bugs. It's just the fact of knowing that's moving around in your mouth. Oh, I can't deal with it. I think, yeah, like, I don't know, like blood and guts and decapitation and, you know, even like cannibalism stuff, like that doesn't really bother me too much. Yeah, maybe people eating like raw food or something like that. Like it doesn't bother me too much. It is like certain things though. I have to think of it. Like I have to think about what are the things. It's not often, but what are the things I like avert my eyes when I'm watching something? Oh, there was a this is a little explicit.
I don't care. I researched this. It is old.
It's a little explicit. There was a yes. Oh goodness, I don't know. Yeah, it's because I know it's really so it's interesting that I had this reaction, but it's real. I think it's fair, but it's real. But it's like, yeah. So seeing like any stuff with like pregnancies that go wrong, like in labor or like bad C-sections.
Oh yeah,
that's tough to watch. And like, and I'm not a woman, but like there was on the new Game of Thrones show, House of the Dragon, there was a scene, spoiler alert in case you haven't seen the first episode, second episode. And I was like, ooh, I don't know if I can watch this. In the movie Blondes about Marilyn Monroe, there was a scene there. It wasn't as explicit. And then there was another one. Oh, the show, C. It's on Apple Plus. It's with Jason Momoa. There's also a scene of like pregnancy or something like that. It was like a premature. I was just like, oh god, like I don't know, that stuff kind of creeps me out a little bit, but yeah, I won't entirely look at that the whole time. Like,
do you think that's an empathy thing though?
Yeah, because like obviously like I
wouldn't say that's a disgust reaction.
Yeah, maybe like placental stuff does kind of freak me out a little bit. It's just kind of,
it is nasty, and also if you get that placenta like stuck in you, you can like die, like rot. So
yeah,
that's something weird. It's very strange.
But like, you know how like people like if they watch like what's his name, David Blaine, and he's like sticking needles through his arm and stuff like that. Like I can watch that doesn't bother me. Or like he's pulling out swords out of his mouth, or frogs coming out, like that doesn't bother me. But like I don't know. It's very specific, I guess, for me. There's just certain specific things where I'm like, oof, I can't watch it. So I don't know. I think it might be somewhat of an empathy thing, but it's not all that. It's definitely some disgust too. Not like about what's happening per se, but just like the actual like organic matter of it is just like, ugh, it's like spongy or slimy, or it's like, ugh, it's so gross. Like,
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. So but anyways, all that to say, yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting how we have, yeah, certain ideas about why do people have, how we perceive other people's, you know, disgust, reactions, you know, why they do or don't have. I think that is a really interesting, because it is sort of attributional. You are making certain attributions about the person, or, you know, you should feel this way. Like if you don't, are you not impacted by this? Are you like, do you have some traits somewhere, some dark traits where you're okay with that? I will say also, but again, maybe it's not Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's an overlap here, I guess. I'm realizing as I'm saying this out loud. When I've watched movies about psychopaths or sociopaths or serial killers and stuff, and they like, are mutilating animals and stuff, I
don't like that.
I don't like that. I don't know if it's disgust though.
No, it makes me angry. It might be moral disgust.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. Yeah. I definitely. I don't feel. I don't feel angry. I feel sad for the animal, and I also feel sad for the person because they're sick. That's how I see it. It's the same thing with like pedophilia. Like I feel bad for all parties involved.
Yeah.
Because I realize that it's these folks are sick and they need treatment, and like I see it that way. And so like, I mean, obviously I'm not going to watch like obviously any of those acts, but it's just like, hearing about it, or if you're like, there's a fictionalized account of something that's like, like that's terrible for obviously the victim, but also usually the perpetrator is usually unwell. They're very sick. So
I think that's a healthier way of viewing it. I get angry or I get disgusted and outraged. I have a hard time feeling sympathy. I have
some clinical experience working with some of these individuals. So I don't know, but that's but people, but so like, going to what you were saying, like if you don't have that reaction, people are like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, because it doesn't seem like the socially appropriate.
This doesn't bother
reaction.
you? It's like, no, it bothers me, but I don't know. It's a weird, it's a really interesting question that you're asking and about perceptions of disgust and how that works. Sorry, is there anything else, any other thoughts or any other responses that you wanted to say to any of the other points I made about disgust on this?
No, I like disgust. I think it signals stuff. It's fun to study. And then people get real weird when you start talking about gross stuff. So I always find that exciting.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. It is interesting. It's also, I do think there's something about either personality or temperament or something of like what each person's thing is, right? And it doesn't tell you like their whole like psychological profile, but it's interesting to see how some people's reactions to some things are one way and other people's reactions are totally different about the same thing. I think that's super interesting. Yeah, I am thinking about my conversation with Colton. I'm trying to think his last name. Is it Scrivener? I think that's right.
Yeah, his stuff is great.
Yeah, we had a really nice conversation about horror films, and we did talk about, I think, disgust at some point and what it is and why do people watch it and some of the more kind of emotional piece of it. And he's super into that stuff, and it's really, really fascinating, the research he does. And yeah, it's everybody's different. I think it does unconsciously tell you a little bit about the person, like and if you're taking about like horror films, it's like, yeah, I can watch the gore and all that stuff. Like that stuff doesn't bother me. I can even watch like the possession stuff. Right? That doesn't bother me, right? I don't believe in that. So it's just like, yeah, that stuff's fake. I don't know, like home invasion stuff. Oof. Oh no, I can't do that.
Really?
Ooh.
I have to. I don't know. I feel compelled to watch it because I want to like figure out like
this is Colton. This is literally his point. Is like people see it as like practice. They're like, how could I prepare? Like I can't watch that stuff. I won't sleep for weeks. I just can't watch it. Any like home invasion or like homes that are like possessed or something with like something from years ago, and then more like kind of, I don't know, abstract ways. So like, I mean, The Shining is terrifying, but it's an amazing film, but it's the way the camera's used. It's all the like how you have to imagine what's going on as opposed to showing you like jump scares or anything like that. It's like, what's this person going to do next? I'm not going to fully spell it out. There's stuff going off camera you don't know, so you have to use it. That's the stuff that gets me. But other people, it's like the jump scare thing, or other people, it's like the demonic possession that's going to terrify them. So, it just, everybody's different. But my point is that everybody has it says a little bit about them, I think.
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, my thing that gets me is the jump scares, but like everything else, I'm just like, oh, this is fine. But like, I want to figure it out, like, so I can do the things, right? Because I don't know, like I was followed to my car, like in the spring, like I stayed at school late, and I was walking to my car in this parking lot, and there was some dude hiding in some bushes who followed me to my car.
Oh gosh.
Like literally followed me to my car, and I was like, okay, I'm ready for this. And I was like, it's gonna happen, but it's like I'm gonna go down fighting. And like, thankfully he didn't try to attack me, but he was like right behind me, like following me to my car. And so yeah, it was, but I didn't get scared until afterwards. Because like in the moment, I was like, I'm gonna do this.
Brain took over. Yeah, it's like, how do I
do that?
Right.
I don't know. It's just I like to know how to deal with the situations. So I'm like basically, like, yes, Colton's research. This is me. It's about me.
Yes. Yeah. No, his research is really interesting. It's very, very interesting. Well, look, Hannah, I really appreciate you giving me all of your time to talk about your research and to really just have a really nice conversation. I always really like these types of podcasts where I can just really just have a conversation in this way about really important stuff. And so I really appreciate it. Where can people find you and find your research and any relevant places?
Yeah, I think I'm on Twitter, allegedly. Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I'm trying to be silly. It's HK Bradshaw, and then that's my handle. And then there's a link to my website on my Twitter that has my publications on it, because you should never like pay $40 for a PDF publication, because I get none of that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I will make sure that's all there in the notes, and people can follow you and read your great stuff. Yeah. Thanks for having the conversation. I really did enjoy it. I think people really enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thank you for having me on.
Of course.